Global conflict is on the rise because people are losing their minds. If you are eating a daily buffet of information that's been highly processed by social media and the news, you are going to break your own brain. Just like how highly processed food destroys your body, a junk food diet of triggering slanted information is going to destroy your ability to think well. You've got to train yourself to avoid traps and see through the BS. To that end, behavioral economist Dan Ariely and I dive into how to think clearly, even in dangerous times.
So the breeding ground for misbeliefs is stress. And I don't mean the stress of I'm so busy. The stress is like Job. I don't understand the world. Why is the world not better to me? Why are things not working my way? Why is my significant other so unhappy with me? My kids, my work, why is health? I mean, across the range. And now, what happens in those conditions of stress? People feel a need for an answer. Even just cognitively, if we give people a picture with black, white, and gray dots, what's called white noise, right? Just dots. And we say, do you see a pattern? The more stressed people are, the more they see a pattern. When people go parachuting, the closer they are to jumping, the more they see patterns.
Interesting.
When there's violence in the country, the more people see patterns. So we need a story. We need to, like the stress of what is going on here, we want to resolve it. And we don't need just any story. We prefer a story with a villain because it's not our fault, it's somebody else's fault. And oddly, we prefer a complex story to a simple one. Now that's strange, right? Because usually we think people love simple stories. Why do people want the complex ones? These people feel like underdogs. Something is wrong with me, something is not okay, so on. Feeling that they're the only one who understands the complex story gives them a feeling of superiority. So we have this stress, and then people want a story with a villain and a complex story. And thanks to the internet, for example, they can find examples of that. So that's the starting point. Need for a story, and they find a story. The next part is the cognitive part. And it has confirmation bias, right? We look at the information that is going to confirm our hypothesis. We have motivated reasoning. When needed, we can bend the story to fit what we believe, even if that's not what the story is saying. We can just distort the facts. And then we have overconfidence in what we believe, even when it's not justified. I actually like the term corrosive information. When people use the term misinformation, there's this feeling that, we could fix it. Here's misinformation, here's the truth, we'll fix it. When you think about corrosive, you say people are different on the other side of this, and there's really no going back. So maybe I'll say a little bit about my history with COVID and the origin of this book. So here I am, beginning days of COVID, and the world is crazy, and people from everywhere realize that social science is important. How do we get people to wear masks, and how do we do distance education, and how do we reduce domestic violence? I sit there with my laptop and 2 phones just trying to help. And I feel at the top of my career. I am like being the most helpful person I can imagine ever. All of a sudden I get an email that says, Dan, what happened to you? What's wrong with you? How did you become this person? And I say, what do you mean? And I get back a list of links. I'll just describe one of them. That link shows pictures of me in hospital, very badly burned. And then it goes to say that because of my injury, I started hating healthy people. And that's why I joined the Cabal and Bill Gates and the Illuminati to try and kill as many healthy people as possible. And that's what the pandemic is all about. And I get this and lots of other links, and I look at all of them, and very hard to believe, right? Here's a view of myself that doesn't coincide with what I think of myself. And I spend a month trying to argue with these people, trying to give them my facts and my side of things and so on. And of course I failed, and I only got things worse. By the way, a few of my friends, experts, told me don't do it, and I did it anyway. And then I went on basically a 2-year long adventure of visiting some of the darkest corners of the internet, meeting with lots of people, talking to about 20 misbelievers in a very deep and repeated way, trying to understand the mechanism. I call it the funnel of misbelief, what takes people and change them in some fundamental way. But some people trust themselves. They see something and they say, it feels like the truth, it must be the truth. And some people question themselves. So guess what? The people who trust themselves are more likely to go the funnel of misbelief. And then there's a couple of other personality traits. Interestingly, people who are complete the picture, like something that is really good for artists. You see a few things and you can draw connections and you see things that were not there but is connected to the story. All of those things make it more likely that people would go down the funnel of misbelief. And then the final component is the social component. What is the social component? So if we think about stress as the breeding ground, and we think about cognitive and personality as kind of making it further, the social is really what seals the deal. So what are the elements within the social part? And the first one is ostracism. And you remember the story about ostracism, the guy who kind of started the big research on ostracism describes a day in the park. He goes with his dog to the park and he sees two people playing frisbee. They play frisbee. He walks by, the frisbee falls next to his feet. Picks it up, throws it to one of them, and to his surprise, they throw it back to him. And the three of them for a few minutes play frisbee. And then they stop throwing it to him. And he feels rejected. What? Now, he didn't know them. He didn't come to play with them, but he felt rejected. And it's a very interesting feeling. So he went to the lab and he tried to recreate it. How did he recreate it? He got two people to work for him and one participant. And the participant came to an experiment. He said, look, the experiment is not ready. Please wait outside with these other two people. And these other two people pick a ball and start throwing it between the three of them. They throw the ball. In one condition, they keep on playing for 10 minutes. In the other condition, they play between the three of them for 5 minutes, and then they stop, and they just play between the two of them, taking the real participant and getting him to be ostracized. And now the experiment starts. And now the question is, how does that person feel? And that person feels more lonely and less connected, less optimistic about the world, with less confidence. They're less likely to help. They're more likely to cheat, all kinds of terrible things. So when we think about the social element, ostracism is the first part. And I don't know about you, but when I realized that, I also realized that when some people are starting to go down the funnel of misbelief, I sometimes, not intentionally, I ostracize them.
Interesting.
Somebody is coming up with a strange belief, and I try to crush it. No, not crush it, but how could you possibly, something like that. Now, for me, it's a little joke. For them, it's probably a big offense. So the social part starts with ostracism, and we've all done it. And by the way, with COVID, we did it a lot. Now, when people feel ostracized, what do they need? Supportive community. So where do they go? Mostly somewhere online that gives them this support. Now it gets worse. Why does it get worse? Because people now are part of a group and they want to get to a good position in that group. How do they do it? By saying something extreme. This is where this term we use is shibolet. And the story in the Bible, they come from the Bible, this word, is that there were two tribes that had a very bloody war. At the end of the tribe, each of them was on a different side of the river, but they didn't know if all their people were on this side and none of the others were on that side. And these two tribes differed in their pronunciation of the word shibolet. One of them said shibolet and one of them said sibolet. So imagine we walk around and I show you the plant and I say, how do you pronounce this? If you said it the way I do it, everything is good and you get to live. If you say it the wrong way, I maybe chase you away or try to kill you. And this term shibboleth, we're using it for things that are not about what the word is, but about showing identity. So I ask you, what's the name of this plant? I don't care about the name of the plant. I care about your tribal belonging. So now we're in a group, and now we want to show our belonging, and we want to be extreme, and maybe we say things that are not true, but show identity. Because if you just say like the run-of-the-mill things, everybody agrees with you, you're not showing yourself. You have to say something outrageous in order to show your true identity. So, imagine that you're, saying something about being a vegan, or whether you say something about gun control or gender identity or whatever. People often say things that they don't necessarily believe, but are signaling their identity. But then, of course, once they repeat them, they become accepted truth or new standard, and they start believing them themselves. And then there's the last component. And the last component is cognitive dissonance. And of course, everybody knows cognitive dissonance, but just to refresh, let's think about Festinger's original observation. And his original observation was about this woman who said that on a particular date, the earth will be destroyed, and only she and her followers will be saved because aliens would come and take them away. And Festinger wondered what would happen the day after, when the earth is not destroyed and her followers realize that nothing happened. Now, if we think about two types of followers, we say there's the extreme followers, the die-hard ones, the one that gave up all their money and said goodbye to their family and sold their homes and so on, and were just ready to take off. And there's on-the-fence followers. The standard prediction is that the die-hard followers will be the most disappointed. They would say, she lied to us. And they would just leave. And the so-so followers, we said, we never really believed it. She's a fine woman, let's stay. But Festinger predicted the opposite. He said that the die-hard believers could not say to themselves, I was wrong. They did so much that they would have to adjust their beliefs. And cognitive dissonance is about if we act in a certain way, our beliefs follow. Usually we think that our beliefs direct our actions. I believe X, therefore I work in that direction. But Festinger showed it can also go in the other way, which is we act in a certain way, then our beliefs follow. And that's the last social component, which is basically saying that once people have invested so much of their time and social capital in a particular misbelief, you can't just say, I'm closing shop, I'm going back. You basically change. So in her example with Festinger, the diehard believer the next day said, she saved us. It was all thanks to her, and now they went to recruit more people. In the same way that with COVID, people have moved on to the next thing. You say, it's not COVID, of course. The real thing was the World Health Organization, or the real thing is global warming, or it's the government's control with crypto, or they come up with bigger and bigger stories and moving in with it. So if we think about it as this machinery that basically taps all of psychology, like this book is not everything, but it's almost like an introductory to psychology textbook, because every element of our psychology is attacked to get us down to this funnel of misbelief. And the amazing thing is not the people who go down that. The amazing is kind of the people who don't. What is the strength that some people have to stay with our convictions?
Yeah, that's what I want to cover today. So in the book, you lay them out super succinctly. So you've got basically the mind works in a certain way. And this is one of the things that's drawn me to your work is I have an absolute obsession with understanding how the brain works so that I can master my own mind, not be tricked by the cognitive distortions, my biases, motivated reasoning, all that. And so what I really want to get to today is, okay, so we just walked through the problem. Now I want to better understand, like, what is it in the cognitive architecture that leaves us this way? Why do we think so emotionally? But why does it feel like it's not emotional? Yeah. What comes first, the intuition or the rationalization? Then once we have that mapped out, then we can get into, okay, now how do I avoid these traps. So I have the good fortune of having read your other books, and arguably your most famous book, Predictably Irrational, basically lays out that we're wildly emotional creatures. We think we're using rationality, but in reality, we're not. The rationality comes post hoc.
That's right.
Walk us through that. One, how does the sequencing work? And then two, if you have any evolutionary insights as to why that would have been advantageous, I think that'd be really helpful.
Okay, so let's talk outside of misbelief for a second about our nature of making decisions. So emotions in general are basically rules of thumb. They're not accurate. They're not designed to be accurate. They're designed to dictate a particular behavior that is almost instinctual. You're at the edge of the jungle. You see a tiger. You don't want to take out an Excel spreadsheet and start computing anything. You want a stimulus response. You see a tiger, start running. You can figure out later that you're afraid. Like that, we don't even want the fear to come first. We want you to just start running. And that's true for lots of things. We have this very quick, intuitive system that gets us to act, because that's what nature wants. Now, if you ask the evolutionary question, why, there's a cost and benefit, right? So what's the benefit of figuring out the absolute correct answer? What's the cost of making a mistake and staying there for too long and meeting the tiger? Right? There's some very, very high asymmetry in that. By the way, that was the world a long time ago. It's not necessarily the current world, right? In the current world, we can make very different mistakes, right? Evolutionary speaking, if you think about nature evolving our cost-benefit trade-off, it's not the same. It's not the same as now. Another example, by the way, with more about misbelief, is think about communication. In nature, communication always has a true signal. What do I mean by that? The most famous example is the tail of the peacock. The peacock has this long, very dysfunctional tail. In fact, if you take young peacocks and you stitch long tails on them, they get eaten faster, right? Because the tail is a handicap. Now you say, okay, why would peacocks adopt a dysfunctional tail that makes it difficult to run and escape and so on? Because it's a true signal. So if you're a strong, virile male, you can carry a long tail and you will not be eaten because you're strong. If you're a weak peacock and you try to carry a long tail, it would not work out. So if you think about the tail of the peacock, it really communicates what kind of a male you are. And if you cheat, you'll cheat for a short time and then you'll be eaten. Now contrast that to Facebook, where you can say whatever you want and there's not necessarily there's not a real signal in it. Now we can do what's called cheap talk. So, hey, I'm just saying. Like imagine that we all went on Facebook and we said, how long is our tail? Whatever the modern analogy, you could say, oh, mine is 10 meters and here, look at even a picture that supports this. The communication in nature, by the way, start not from the entity that creates the signal, but from the entity that receives it. The female, in this case, the communication starts with what the female would believe. It doesn't start with what the male feel they're going to talk about or to communicate. It starts with the listener, and then the transmitter of the signal have to give a true signal. Now, we're in a different world. We still trust signals. I don't know about you, but my first instinct, actually, it's true for everybody, but how gullible we are. I'm very gullible. But even the people who are not that gullible, our first instinct is to trust. Why do we trust? Because we grew up in an evolutionary environment in which signals were true signals. Maybe not 100%, but to a large degree. So we evolved in a certain environment. We evolved in a certain environment with costs and benefit. We evolved in the environment in which emotions were very helpful decision-making, in which signals were very true, and now we created a very different environment. And just as another example, think about the cookie. We created a cookie, an optimal combination of salt, sugar, and fat. So much that we want one, and after we eat one, we want to keep on eating the next one. But it basically hijacks our emotions, right? It hijacks our taste buds. It's not a cognitive process where a cookie manufacturer is saying, look at the cost and benefit of eating a cookie. They are attacking our emotions. Our emotion developed for this decision-making, quick decision-making process. But now, of course, they're being used by other entities.
And by other entities, you mean advertising companies, social media apps?
Everything, right? So, imagine you're a supermarket. And, I go to the supermarket and I have a plan of what I want to buy. But the supermarket also has a plan. And the supermarket plan is different than mine. What kind of tools could they use to most likely get me to do what they want and not what I want? It's emotion, right? It's not somebody giving a lecture on the benefits of fruits and vegetables. It's about sugar, fat, salt. That's the mechanism. So we created a society that is very much built on temptation and emotions everywhere, not just in social media and not just notification on the phone, and it's everywhere. It's an easier trigger to press than to go through the cognitive route.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things that I've taken away from the way the human mind works, is that I'm going to have the intuition or the emotion first, and then I'm going to put some sort of rationalization on top of it. I know that people have sort of discredited the sort of tri-layer brain, but it certainly is a useful framework to think through that I have a more primeval lizard reptilian brain at the center. Then I've got my mammalian brain, which is very much the limbic system. It's emotions, which the interesting way to think about emotions for me is emotions are the way that the subconscious mind speaks to the conscious mind. So if the conscious mind is processing data in a faster and vaster way, it's not going to be able to communicate through language, which is a much smaller bandwidth pipe. Instead, it's just going to make you feel something. So you're at the edge of the jungle, boom, tiger, you turn and run even before you realize what's going on. You just had this insane impulse to do it and you take off running. And then, like you said, you'll worry about the truth of the situation later. And once I understood, okay, wait a second, this is the impulses that I feel is a product of evolution, because nature has one aim, which is to make sure that I stay alive long enough to have kids that have kids. And so if it had to do that when I was an amoeboid and then, something coming out of the primordial ooze of the ocean, and it's like on and on and on, and that's going to be the thing that is consistent and carries across the different species that we move through to become a human. It's like, okay, that's preserved because it's so effective. Whereas if I'm going to rationalize it, I'm not necessarily going to act. And you'll probably know these studies better than I, but very interesting to me that if you damage the emotional centers of the brain, a person will be normal in every way, but they can't make a decision. Do I want steak or fish? And they'll rattle off all the advantages to steak and all the advantages to fish, but ultimately they can't make a decision because they don't have that internal impulse towards one or the other that when they have, they'll then give you a rationalization for. But the reality is it's the emotion that allowed you to make a decision, and you layer that on at the end.
Yeah, so I'll give you two other kind of stories for your arsenal. One is the question of fairness. So, your parents pour a little bit more orange juice for your sister than to you, and you feel that there's something unfair. Or somebody at work is getting paid unfairly or get promoted, and it really hurts us. And you say, why? What is this? Where is this coming from? And it turns out that if we want to work together, we need to trust that fairness is inside you, right? So imagine you and I are going hunting together, and then at some point we have to do something separately. I want to trust that when the time comes, you will have an instinct toward fairness, that I don't need to supervise you, so on. So now you can see how for humanity to work in a group, you really want everybody to be concerned with fairness, because I want to work only with people who are concerned with fairness. And I'll give you another example, and this one relates to working from home and working from the office.
How often are you checking your credit score, afraid of identity theft or account breaches? We all use the internet every single day for important things like personal banking and remote work, so why not protect yourself with our sponsor, Aura? Aura is an all-in-one cybersecurity service that keeps you safe online. Aura identifies data brokers exposing your info and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Aura also monitors your credit, tracks your passwords for data breaches, and secures your online activity with VPN and anti-malware protection. You can try Aura for free for 2 weeks by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code.
There's this amazing research. I still can't believe it, but I've seen it. You get people to meet new people. They meet new people, they shake hands, just imagine a gathering. And what they see in the videos is that almost everybody at some point raises their hand and smells the other person.
What?
Yes. Now, I saw this and I said, I've never done that.
Never.
I've done it as well.
No.
Yes.
These are lies.
Yeah, these are lies. Go ahead.
What?
Go ahead. Take the next social gathering that you're doing, install cameras, and observe it. Now, here is the thing. Smell taps the emotional center extremely quickly and directly. We all know that smell predicts romantic love. With smell, we can also predict who your friends are going to be. We think we don't smell well. We actually smell very well, but we just need to be close. We're far away from the ground. We're not like dogs. But we have a very good sense of smell, and smell is incredibly important. Again, think about romantic love, and you would say there's something about smell that is incredibly important. Can you articulate it? Not really, but there's something very primal about smell. And smell communicates genetic fit. I mean, it communicates all kinds of things. So anyway, there's lots of ways in which our mind works and we're unaware of it. And, smell is just one of them. But it's kind of an amazing example because you say, I don't think I've ever smelled anybody, but you have.
That's so interesting. Okay, so
basically, if we go back to the funnel of misbelief, we're saying there's this mechanism that starts with stress. And everything
stress in a brain that reasons emotionally.
Exactly. And not only that, the brain cannot discern the origin of the stress. It's not as if you say, oh, I'm stressed because of my kids. Let me just realize that stress is coming from there. No, stress is kind of a general activity that we have. We feel stress. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It accumulates across the domains of life, and we just feel we need a story and an answer and a villain and so on. And this idea about the brain being a storyteller after the fact is part of this, right? Because if we understood what the origin of stress is, maybe we wouldn't have this need to tell it. But we have this stress. We don't understand it. And then we have a drive to tell a story with the villain, and the story needs to be complex.
So when you say that we don't understand, so take COVID. I knew where the stress was coming from. I just didn't know what to do about it. And one of the things I found interesting in the book, and tell me if you think this feeds into it, is that it really is about control. Finding patterns, as you were saying, you're about to do something super dangerous, you're more likely to find patterns. Patterns give you a sense, oh, these dots connect, and therefore I can understand it. And if I can understand it, I can do something about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, just intuition, which I know to distrust, trust me after reading your book. But my intuition would be that it is more that I am going to apply a story. And whether that story ends up being accurate or not may be important, but I don't feel like, oh, I don't know where the stress is coming from. I will stamp it with, it's this.
So I think you know at some level that it's COVID, but you don't really know where it's coming from.
Is this the unpredictability that makes it?
It's the fact that, again, we say we feel an emotion, but all emotions have similar connections, and we don't know exactly where they come from. So I give this story in the book about one of the early research on misattribution of emotion, and there were basically men who crossed the bridge, and it was a very narrow, shaking bridge, like a hanging bridge. And they met a researcher. They didn't know they were going to be in an experiment. They just thought they were walking, but they met a researcher, and she met them in the middle of the bridge, in the place where it's the most shaking and so on. And she asked them some boring questions about, like research.
Let me guess, she happens to be attractive?
She happened to be attractive. And then she said, by the way, if you want to call me later and find out the results of the experiment, here's my number. Okay, now nobody cares about the result of the experiment. And they compare it to a non-shaking bridge. What happened? Many more men call her.
From the shaky bridge.
From the shaky bridge. They basically have an experience of something is shaking, my heart is pounding, my hands are sweaty. I don't know where this is coming from, right? Knowing where the emotion is coming from is not easy. It's not easy. So yes, during COVID, you could say it's COVID, but is it coming from work? Is it coming from worrying about China? Is it coming from worrying about the US economy? Where exactly is it coming? And I'll give you one other example. There's a beautiful study showing that the number of conspiracy theories about COVID have a strong correlation to how much violence there is in the country. Why?
So the more violent your country, the more conspiracy theories you're likely to believe in. The average person is likely to believe in.
That's right. Why? Because violence creates stress. And it's not as if people can say, oh, this stress belongs to violence. No, it just accumulates throughout. By the way, if you think...
Why does that make you more like... Because I really want to understand, what is my brain doing? So one, Plato's cave simulation hypothesis, like, to me, you are living in a simulation, not in that I actually think the world is a simulation, but your brain is creating a simulation. You only see 0.0035% of the visible electromagnetic spectrum, or the available electromagnetic spectrum. You see such a tiny fraction. Your brain is oversimplifying the world in a massive way. Emotions feel to me like, I can't tell you, I'm not going to react to the quote unquote reality. I'm not going to try to explain it. Potential danger, potential mate, whatever. And so the emotions are parsing these incredibly complex things down into something that I can feel and I can react on immediately. And if that's true, and I really am then in effect living in the simulation of the reduced, might be the easiest way to explain it. It's simplified. I'm just my brain is simplifying the world for me.
That's right.
And saying, to make this manageable, so you're not having to count the photons that reflect off a surface in a given wavelength, it's blue or it's black or it's red. You just see the colors.
Yeah.
That's a gross simplification of what's really happening.
Beautiful mechanism, a beautiful metaphor, yes.
Okay, so if we're trapped in that bubble, how do we begin to parse out what we can listen to, what we can trust? Because the one thing in the thesis of your book that we may disagree on is I think everybody is prone to this. I don't think anybody escapes it. I think everybody is down some portion of the misbelieving chute. You talk about humility in the book, which I think is ultimately probably the only path out of all this, which we will definitely talk about, because in the book, you don't give people the path out.
Yes, I do.
Which is very horrible.
I am sorry about that.
But we will for sure talk about.
So you said so many things. So let me go back to them. So the first thing you ask is, why do I say that the mind cannot separate different sources of stress? Why would it be efficient in a world in which the brain tries to simplify things? And here is what I think is happening. And it's hard to reason about evolutionary, but here is what I think is happening. Imagine that your brain wants to separate whether you're in a good place or a bad place. Stay or go. Eventually is the decision. If it's about, this is a bad place, I don't care so much why. It could be stress because of kids or significant other or work and so on, there's a signal of badness that is incredibly important, and the specifics are less important. Now, in the modern world, where we have lots of control and so on, it's more important. But if you think in an ancient world, the big decision you want to say, good or bad, stay or leave, and the reasons for that are less important. So that's why you say, okay, there's some badness here. I don't care so much where the badness, and just go away. So the mind basically gets signals of bad things are happening, and they accumulate, and you want them to accumulate, because if let's say you have two things, you have family and work. If one of them is half bad and the other one is half bad, is it really different than all of them, one of them being 100% bad? No, whatever is bad, you want to just change it. So we just categorize the goodness and badness of things across domains. By the way, the same thing is true for pain. If you have a pain in your leg and in your hand, and you're not a doctor, you say, leave that place and do something else, right? So the mind accumulates across domains, doesn't care so much where it's coming from, and codes for the goodness or badness of this whole thing. And now, when something is bad, it says, okay, let's figure out what's a coping mechanism. And the coping mechanism becomes this, in the case of misbelief, it becomes like a bad response. And a metaphor to think about this is obsessive compulsive disorder. So how does that work? Imagine that I feel uncomfortable going outside in the world with my burns, right? I worry, and this is true, I worry about how people would react to my hand, how people shake it. Every time somebody shakes my hand, it kind of brings back the notion that it reminds me that I'm injured, that people think about it differently, they don't know what to do, and so on. So imagine I have this worry. How will people react to me? What will people say? And so on. And I find a solution. And my solution is to wash my hands. Now, it doesn't solve the problem, but it gives me a sense of control and so on. And then it reinforces every time before I go home, before I meet people, I wash my hands, I feel a bit more in control. That's the obsessive compulsive mechanism, right? There's an activity that gives us a sense of control that helps us with something else. What happens in misbelief? I feel stressed, I don't know what to do, I go online. I watch a video of somebody being the villain with a story and so on. But this is where the metaphor breaks down, because the next time I watch the video, I don't necessarily watch the same one. And maybe I watch it for longer, because that's the nature of videos. Maybe there's one video leading to another, and next time I watch another one, it expands my cognitive framework of how I understand things. So it starts with a sort of a healthy response to a bad situation, but then it really goes awry.
Okay, so I'm going to give you back very succinctly the funnel of misbelief. Let me know if I've missed anything.
Yeah.
So it starts with a person they're stressed, they're getting overwhelmed, to use today's language. In their overwhelm, if you want to supercharge this, if that overwhelm is being generated by ostracization, so that they are now hypersensitive to being left out, they want to seek the comfort of the known, they're looking for that pattern that's going to let them regain some kind of control, that they have a narrative that makes this all make sense. They find people that resonate with their take. And so, hey, the JFK assassination or COVID, just to keep it to something really, masks are ineffective. I knew it. I knew that they were ineffective. Yeah. And now, instead of being rejected by my family, who's like, don't talk like that in this house, like that's crazy talk, I get accepted. The world's starting to make more sense. And that feeling of unease, I'm now putting a layer of narrative over the top of that says that unease was I understood something other people did not understand. They were unable to face the truth. These people really get it. And so now I'm being soothed by being accepted. I'm being soothed by understanding what the path forward is. I feel better about myself because I understand a complex story that other people do not understand. And now I reinforce my identity with this new group. And now you end up with people on parallel paths.
That's right.
Or I think you called them parallel universes or different universes.
And you basically said it, but there's the cognitive part, right? You choose which information to pay attention to and not. And there's the personality part that some people are more susceptible to this than others. But that's exactly the funnel. And now you say, when I think about these people in our lives that have turned out to be so different, it's not because they are so different. It's because there was something in their experience that got them to be stressed and looking for an answer, and they started going down a path, and it helps us understand better what happened to them. Hopefully, it will help us understand better when somebody is in the initial stage and we just see the dangers, and maybe we can still help them. There's one other thing that is worthwhile mentioning is that as a society, we have less and less resilience. Economic inequality, for example, is a big contributor to reduce resilience. Right? If you think about what's the chances that you would go to one of your neighbors and ask for an egg, as economic inequality increases, even at the level of neighborhood, people are less likely to ask for help. And I think we're moving into that direction in general. In COVID specifically, we lost a lot of resilience. So you're saying the usual inoculation we have against stress is support from other people. We had less of it during COVID, but we also have less of it in general.
Okay, so do I think we have less of it? I think that we have a more deranged form of it because now people are turning to social media. And when I was reading the book, I thought, one of the things that we're really up against is what I call velocity of information. Because one of the notes I took when I was reading the book, and you never go into this, but it's like, I have a base assumption that people really are being lied to. So just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you, right? And so I think that there's also mixing into all of this, all the things you said about being ostracized, stress emotionally sets you up to be ready for this, to go into the arms of the people that accept you. And you've got the algorithms which literally funnel you down a chute so fast into the arms of people that view the world like you, that becomes just a greased chute. So you've got all this information coming at you. Some people really are lying. Some of this stuff really is being weaponized against people. And now you're able to barrage people enough with enough misinformation, disinformation, confusion, whatever you want to call it, corrosive information, you're able to hit them with enough of that the average person isn't able to look into the different claims. It's coming too fast and furious. They have to use a heuristic, rule of thumb, just a fancy word. And as they come up with that heuristic, it's largely going to be based on social proof. So all of my friends have said, or the news station that I listen to has said, or my favorite podcaster has said, whatever their rule of thumb is. And then you will more likely, because of the cognitive bias around, I've now got some of my identity tied up in this. I've had arguments with my family. So now I'm really, to your point about the aliens are coming, it's the people that were most hardcore about it that are least likely to change. So now the more that I invest in this, the more I'm motivated to reason in that way. And so now I'm cherry picking the data. I'm seeing the things that I expect to see. And so this is where we get into simulation theory, where what I'm really trying to get people to understand one simple fact about the brain, and that is you view the world through what I call frame of reference. You have a frame of reference. And the easiest way to explain that is you're wearing a pair of glasses that have wildly distorted lenses, wildly. And over the course of your life, you and people around you have shaped those lenses to distort the world in a certain way. And your problem is you've confused that with objective truth. And so we all view the world in a distorted fashion, and we all mistake it for reality. And to me, the only path forward is to understand that as a social species, there's an array of personality types for a reason. And just to think in political lines for a second. So you've got.
Can I stop you?
Please.
You're saying so many things. I just want to stop and dissect each of those. So So the first thing you said, and you said it in a much more extreme way than I say in the book, is that this funnel of misbelief is really weaponized. And in the same way that the cookie is designed, you're saying everything we have around us is tapping the weakest part of the human mind, the cognitive, the emotional, the social proof, the loneliness, the social support, to get us to believe strange things, right? It's almost, you're saying, it's almost as if the world has been designed more and more to get people down the funnel of misbelief. We have all of these things that are very potent mechanism to get us to believe things that are good for somebody else, maybe, but certainly not good for us, or good for some purposes, but not for our real long-term well-being. So that's one important thing. And you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the big lessons, is that we have created this machinery that has very undesirable consequences. And if most of the book is pessimistic, because it describes that. Look, the way you describe it is even more pessimistic than I am. You use the term weaponized, but it's to realize how much of our psychology is being attacked. Just tell you how comprehensive this machinery is. And now you say, okay, we have to wake up and do something about it. So that I think is part number one, and very important to realize. The second thing you said is about these glasses that we wear, and we have to recognize them. And for me, I use the term misbelief to describe two things at the same time. One is a belief in something that is not right, that the experts don't think so, the majority of the people don't think so. But the second one is that we hold it as a central truth, and through it we view the rest of the world. So we're in California. Let's say I hold the belief that kale is not that healthy. Not a big deal. Maybe most people in California believe that kale is great. I don't. What's the other one? Brussels sprouts. Okay, even more. Okay, but let's say I believe that kale is not that good. Not a central tendency. I don't view life through that, and so on. But the misbeliefs we're talking about that are dangerous is not just that there's a piece of data about kale that I believe or not, are things that we start believing as a core of my personality. I am a flat earther, right? So, and it's not just that, okay, say, maybe the earth is flat, maybe it's round, I don't care. No. It's a central tendency now of my life. And it's not just about the earth being flat, it's about NASA lying to us, and every pilot lying to us, and every government, and now, and I view the world through that. So now when something bad happens, I don't view it objectively. I view it through that lens. So this understanding, and it's easiest with sports, right? If you, I don't know, you're a fan of some sports team?
Not really,
Okay.
but
You
I
can
use
imagine.
sports analogies all the
Okay.
time, so go for it.
So you have team A and team B, and you're a fan of team A, and team B is your rival, and you have a game, and the referee is calling a call against your team. You can't see it objectively. You can't see it in the same way that
I know
somebody
that
else.
feeling.
You have to see the game as, the referee is evil, vile, blind, somebody paid
All
him
of the
off,
above.
something like that. And it's true how we view our kids and all kinds of things like that. And you're absolutely right that these glasses that we have, it's a good metaphor, color everything. And to the extent that we adopt these negative glasses, they have a lot of downstream consequences. So if we adopt the glasses that everybody out there is with a good intention, everybody wants our benefit. Everybody wants to make the world better. That's probably not correct, but think about those glasses compared to a glass that everybody is against me. Both are incorrect. There are probably some people against you, some people, and so on. But the negative one can have much more dire consequences for you and for society, right? Because now if you look at everything through a negative lens, there's lots of things that you would not participate in, you would not help, we can't get collaborative action, all kinds of things all kinds of things happen. And you mentioned this notion of intellectual humility, and the term I don't like so much, but that's what people
Why don't you like the term?
feels so politically correct to me. Oh, I'm intellectual.
What
I have
would you
intellectual humility. I think it's really about the ability to hold multiple hypotheses in mind and not being convinced too quickly. And I also think it's about reducing the gap between confidence and knowledge. Because the moment you hold multiple things in mind, you basically
That's,
say,
to
I don't know.
Now, you're talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect specifically?
So there's another version of it. That one is also a great one. There's another version of it called the illusion of explanatory depth. And it's similar, but it's different. And the way I demonstrated it, it's been demonstrated a lot, but my version was with a flush toilet. I would go to people and say, do you understand on a scale from, let's say, 1 to 100, how well do you understand the flush toilet? People gave a number, usually a very high number. And then I would say, great. Luckily for you, we have all the pieces of a flush toilet. Why don't you assemble it? What do you think is the percentage of people who managed to assemble it?
Effectively zero.
Exactly zero, including a daughter of a plumber. She was actually...
Wow.
But that's not the important part. The important part is you go back to people and you say, how well do you understand flush toilets? And people say, not so much. And that's really interesting because it's very easy to say, okay, we can teach people something and they will learn, maybe. But in the illusion of explanatory depth, we don't teach people anything. We just ask them to explain. And what they show is that when you ask people to explain something in a bigger depth, most people say, oh, maybe I didn't understand that as much as I thought I would. By the way, if you want party tricks, not party tricks, but if you want a way to talk with your relatives and friends over the holidays who are misbelievers, if you try to attack them, you know it's not going to work, right? You're just going to ostracize them. It will only make things worse. But going at them with the illusion of explanatory depth is actually quite useful. You say that the Earth is flat. Help me understand how it works. And what about the other planets? Are they all flat? And so what happens to fly? I mean, just help me understand. Not you're wrong. Help me understand. And there's another nice trick, which is to say, what would convince you to change your mind? Right? When you're not saying this, you're saying, you tell me what would convince you. Those two things are good for the cognitive component of that, to kind of reduce people's confidence. Because you're absolutely right. If people are, if we think that misbelief or whatever is about adopting something very deeply inside, with high certainty and using it as a lens to view everything else, that's what you want to stop. Like, if people say, COVID, I'm 90% sure that it's this, and 10% sure, 10% that maybe it's not. I don't think anybody would become that extreme. I don't think anybody would create death threats. I don't think anybody would start to change the World Health Organization. I don't think people would start organization that will get people to stop immunizations or stopping cancer. I see now people going against standard healthcare practices in all kinds of illnesses, right? People are going and off the edge with the distrust of the medical establishment, right? The moment you hold two hypotheses and you say, I'm not so sure, that's incredibly healthy. Not easy to get to, especially under stress where people want an answer.
So here's how I have gotten to that in my life. Let me know if there's a better way. I need to know what's true. I understand that truth is fiendishly difficult to actually ascertain. The reason that it's so hard to establish what is true is because most of what we call truth, because we are inside the simulation of the brain, which is oversimplifying the world, most of what we recognize as truth is perception and interpretation. So I see what I expect to see. So I'm over here looking at something. You might be looking at the same thing, but we are almost certainly seeing different things, having different experiences. And then on top of that, we're interpreting it. So I walk away seeing something and believing one thing. You walk away seeing something and believing something else. In the book, you give a great example of sleep paralysis or night terrors. And now some people interpret that as abduction by aliens. And then other people, like, if that happened to me, I'd be like, the one thing I can tell you, it was not an alien abduction. That doesn't fit my worldview, right? So I would not be able to accommodate that no matter how real it felt. I would walk away being like, well, it was crazy. I can't believe how much it felt like I was levitating and like there were aliens around the bed or whatever all the normal signs are. But because my interpretation of that event has to filter through my entire worldview, I'd walk away going, wow, that's a crazy trick of the brain to feel like that. This sounds like night terror, sleep paralysis, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'd walk away with that. But you might have that same experience or somebody else and be like, 100%. I was abducted by aliens. There's literally nothing you could tell me that would make me believe otherwise. I was there. I experienced it. It's real. I could pass lie detector tests, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's how we end up with these just wildly divergent senses of truth. It's not even necessarily, because let's take the hard example, it's not that anybody's lying. It's that they looked at the same thing and they walked away with wildly different conclusions.
Yeah.
Because we are all in our own simulation, which is based around our distorted glasses. And so we're legitimately attempting to see the truth and we can't. Okay, so
just to bring it back. So somebody gets an announcement from the CDC. Two people get announcements from the CDC. And one person says the CDC is always lying, and therefore it's the opposite from what they're saying. And the other person says, I trust the CDC. And you have the same piece of information interpreted in very, very different ways. And then lots of other examples like this. Absolutely.
For sure. So now the question becomes, is there anything that we can call objective truth? And I would say there is. The only thing that I'm supremely confident is physics. So, but even physics, we don't have a unifying theory yet. So we know we're off by some margin, but that's at least, it predicts. And when I think about in my own life, okay, truth matters because it allows me, the closer I get to truth, the more I'm able to predict the outcome of my behaviors. As an entrepreneur, that's incredibly useful because my business lives or dies by my ability to say, if we do this, then we survive. If we, do something else, then we might fail. So I'm always trying to get as close to ground truth as possible. The problem is going back to the phrase you don't like, intellectual humility. So there's something I call the physics of progress. If you want to get better at something, there is a formula. It's essentially the scientific method recontextualized for whatever you're trying to get good at. But you know your end goal. You recognize the obstacle that stands between where you are and the goal you're trying to achieve. And then you're going to come up with a hypothesis of what you would need to do to overcome that obstacle to get to your goal. Then you're going to try it. It's going to fail to some degree, almost certainly. Now, in that moment, if you're willing to be honest, okay, this is all my fault, all 10 fingers back at me. What did I do wrong that if I changed, I would get a better result? And in that is where all the cognitive distortions, all the self-identity, all the anxieties about not being accepted, thinking less of yourself, all the psychic pain that comes with realizing, I'm not as smart as I thought I was, what you build your self-esteem around comes crashing in on you. And so in that moment of analyzing the data and saying, why didn't this work? All the sins of humanity can be found.
Yeah. By the way, I like the fact that you use the scientific approach, the methodology. Running two conditions will be very helpful, right? Because if you run one experiment, one condition of the experiment, it's not always clear if it's successful or failure, or if it could be even better. But running two experiments actually is also a very good thing for saying, so much I don't trust this and I don't know that I'm going to put in two hypotheses at the same time. So, I'm not sure whether physics is, yes, physics is not social science. There's a big difference, but the physics part of it doesn't help me because I want to predict human behavior. Physics is still a different topic, and I want to predict, understand, improve the human condition. And my approach, and you please tell me honestly if it comes out in my books or not, I feel that I'm like a tour guide that is sharing information of what I think is the best knowledge right now. But I try very much not to say that this is there'll be nothing after that. That I'm basically saying, here is the best ability to what I think we know and understand the world right now, but It's certainly possible. We'll learn more. We'll change our opinion. Things will be more complex. And by the way, in social science, things can change because technology changes. The world of attention before social media is different than the world of attention after social media, different before the phone than after the phone. Loneliness, I mean, lots of things are different. But I think that the right approach is to say, what are the things that I hold to be most likely to hold in most circumstances in a general way, but to basically be open-minded to keep examining them. So, and that's one of the risks. So think about something like education.
What do you mean that's one of the risks?
One of the challenges is that we don't keep examining them.
Right.
So think about education. We know very little about education. We spend a tremendous amount of GDP on education. If you ask, what do we know truly about what get kids to be better educated, we know very little. We know very little. And it's because we've done very few experiments, right? What parents will want their kids to go to a randomized control trial on education? So we do correlational studies, but we're hampering our own ability in terms of learning.
So what on that, because what I want to get into, one, I want to know how you establish truth. So I laid out my formula. Truth is that which, when I act in accordance with that, it allows me to accurately predict the outcome of my behaviors. That is, to me, true. If it isn't true, I won't get the right outcome. If it is true, then I will. And then two, if you want to use education as an example, like, what would you do? How would you, because to me, you just plug it into the physics of progress. Like, it is self-evident how you solve these problems to me.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I sort of agree with your first point. I would just make the barrier lower than accurate. I would say that for me, truth is that these tools, principles, and so on help me predict better than without them.
Okay.
But accurate is kind of a high bar, right? So let's say we want to predict. Let's say we have a new computer game, and we want to predict how excited people would be about it, and we have some kind of economics within the game. There's kind of an economic system within that game, and I say, hey, we have this principle of loss aversion. People hate losses more than we enjoy gains. I'm willing to predict that if we have a system where people are afraid of losing, that there's an opportunity to lose, they will be more motivated for the game and more motivated to prevent loss than they would be motivated to gain. I'm not willing to give you a specific accurate. Oh, they will play for 17 minutes instead of 10, but the direction will be the direction that it will be positive. So by adding these elements to our understanding of the mechanism, we will be better able to predict. So I'm with you there. Just accuracy for me is a little high.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't know that we're necessarily going to get to the final end state. Everything is sort of incrementally in the direction.
Perfect.
But what I'm saying is you have to say, I expect this outcome, and I either got that outcome or I didn't, or it was directionally headed towards that, or it wasn't.
Absolutely.
Which is where everybody fails. They either don't have a metric by which they judge. And so then it becomes, we're arguing about what we think is true with no method to prove what is true. And so we get into these deranging battles so that people say that the earth is flat. Okay. That one just seems very simple. There are a set of tests where you can predict, okay, if the earth is flat, it makes these predictions, go run the test.
Yeah.
Did the prediction come true or not? There's a fantastic video of a flat earther who in real time realizes, oh, I was wrong, because he's like, if the earth is flat, I can set up posts at a given height, shine a light through it, and the light will reach, it'll go straight across. If the earth is curved, then the light will be, whatever, in a given place. And it was in the place you would expect if the earth was curved. And so you see him be like, whoa, okay. But that to me is exactly how you prove all this stuff.
Yeah.
So
we're together on this. And there's actually running an experiment is one approach, and basically specifying your prediction is another one up front, right? It's not just about if we think that rationalizing after the fact or motivated reasoning is a big force, you want to be very clear upfront about what your predictions are, right? Because you don't want to be in a situation afterwards, oh yeah, that's really what I meant.
Yep, you go out of your way in the book, write it down, because you're all going to think that you were closer than you were.
That's right. So that's absolutely important, and a very important mechanism to move forward. But the second part in all of this is the level of uncertainty, that we need to accept in a very deep level how much we don't know. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very tough. It's very, very tough to...
Just because humans don't like uncertainty.
That's right. We don't like uncertainty. You can think about all kinds of professions where we think about politicians, right? When do you think a politician could be elected if they said, look, the question about how to move the US economically forward is very complex. There's lots of options. I don't know what will be the composition of the Senate and the House, and I'm not sure what they'll let me do or not do. But trust me, I'll do my best, given the circumstances and the political climate and our economic opportunities and so on. Not going to work, right? How many people would say, yes, let's do that? We don't like uncertainty. There's something very, very strong about. We like confidence, we like stories, we like things that we think are facts. Very, very hard to live with it. So when we say intellectual humility, it's a tough state. We need to understand that. Yes, it's nice to do, but it's very, very tough to actually live in that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me ask a sort of nakedly gross question. Do you think the average person is capable of the intellectual humility that will be required to figure out what is true and what is false?
No.
Okay.
No, and I don't think it's just the average. I think these are very tough questions. They're very, very complex. The world is becoming more complex. Mm. So, when I grew up, there was one school. There was no question of which school to go to. There was the school we went to. For my kids, it's like you need a master's in trying to understand different schools. Healthcare is unbelievably complex. I mean, the world, thankfully, is incredibly interesting, incredibly rich, but also incredibly confusing. And what are we expecting people to be? Like, we're expecting people to be experts in every one of the many aspects of their lives. How can they? It's impossible. So, not because of I doubt people's ability.
Don't you expressly doubt their ability?
I'm saying I also doubt their ability, but saying even without doubting human ability, just the sheer demands that we have on people is completely unacceptable. So people need to make very, very simplifying assumptions. You and I are in a privileged position. Let's say tomorrow we're diagnosed with some medical condition. We would find the time to read the literature. We would talk to experts. We would become slight expert in it quickly. Mm. But you need a big trigger with a real incentive to do that. We have to make a ton of decisions in places that we are no experts on, and we're not going to spend the time, and we have to use some mechanism. So would the majority of the people and the majority of the topics be able to separate truth from not truth? No. But it doesn't mean that we're doomed. Why? Because I think that the ingenuity of society is not about counting on human nature. It's about designing a better world. So imagine that I came to your house every morning, by the way, beautiful house. I came here every day, and I brought a tray of fresh donuts and croissants. How healthy would you be at the end of that year?
Exactly the same.
You would refuse all of them?
Every single time.
Okay. I'm not going to run it because you live in LA and...
I'm very open. It's interesting because you've mentioned this before, and I thought, oh God, if he asked me that question, he's not going to like the answer. I get where you're going, but this also leads to what I'm trying to get to. So I want to show people the way out of this. Make your point, though. I don't want to derail.
So we'll talk about your personality in a minute, but most people would be less healthy at the end of the year. But the point
because
is,
the default option is bad.
Because when we're faced with temptation, and we know that donuts and croissants are not the good thing for us, but when we're faced with temptation, we have a really hard time resisting it. I'm not saying people would fail all the time, but they would fail enough to make them less healthy. But our strength as humanity is to design the world in a different way. We can design the world so nobody comes in the morning to serve donuts and croissants. We can design the world so the notifications on our phone are not popping up all the time. We can design the world so that we don't confuse something funny with something true on the internet. We can design the world to reduce stress. We can design the world to increase resilience. There's lots of things we can do. So if you say, let's take this human mind and say, how capable is this human mind to deal with the modern world? Not so much. How sensitive is this human mind for all kinds of interferences that would derail this human from their long-term objective? Very, very hard. What can we do? The only answer is, so your approach is like the Dalai Lama. You say, I'm going to fix myself. I'm going to train, I'm going to think, I'm going to be more rational, I'm going to do all kinds of things. Going to work for a few people a little bit of the time. I think the real solution is to try and design things in a better way. So saving, let's design better savings too. Health, let's design better health approaches. In all of those things, I think once you design something, everybody can use it. But to count that everyone will figure out their own way of how to do things better, that's a tall order.
Do you ever feel like you're hustling as a creator, working nonstop to grow your online business, but you never hit your revenue goals? Kajabi is the tool you need to make more money, more ways, and more efficiently. It's a one-stop shop to turn your skills, passions, and experiences into enriching online courses, exclusive membership sites, thriving communities, personalized coaching, subscription podcasts, and more. All of which is underpinned by robust analytics, marketing tools, third-party integrations, and easy payment options. And with Kajabi, you have 100% control with free templates that you easily customize, even if you're not tech-savvy. Right now, Kajabi is offering a 30-day free trial to start your own business. Just go to kajabi.com/impact theory. That's kajabi.com/impact theory. Go to kajabi.com/impact theory to earn more doing what you love. Okay, so this is such a big problem, and I like to present very aggressive, very clear propositions, but I want everybody to understand, I distrust myself. I assume I'm wrong. My default assumption is that I'm laying something out that may be directionally correct, but is going to fail in some way, and I need to be constantly seeking disconfirming evidence. With that, I will say that the reason this problem scares me and the reason that I wanted to do a show on this particular problem is because I believe that people are trapped by the way that their mind works, and that we have entered a hyper dangerous period of human evolution where the rate of information is coming at you so fast that whether people are intending to manipulate you or not, they're just like a social media app is just designed to keep you on the app for the longest amount of time. But that might be by enraging you. It might be by scaring you. It might be by whatever. And so that's not necessarily in your best long-term interest. Now, we haven't even defined best long-term interest. And if I have 100 guests on the show and I ask them each to say, what's your North Star? They're gonna be different, which is already crazy. Mine is fulfillment, which is working very hard to gain a set of skills that allow you to serve not only yourself, but somebody else. So that to me is what everybody should be aiming at, but not everybody's going to agree with that. You can already debate that.
I like your definition a lot.
Thank you. But I know not everybody agrees with that. So now we don't even know necessarily what we're aiming for. We don't have the same level of distortion in our glasses, or they're certainly not distorted in the same way. So we're not aiming at the same thing. We do not view the world the same way. We are all subjected to emotional reasoning and then adding the logical thing on the backside of it. And we are living in a society where people are trusting the government less and less. And as you said, distrust begets distrust. So you get into a downward spiral of just distrusting everything. But one of my base assumptions, which again, I'm very open to being wrong, but one of my base assumptions is that there really are people trying to manipulate me, and there really are people that are lying to me. And maybe they're even doing it because they think they have my best interest at heart. But the second you try to impose something top down instead of letting it come bottom up, and this is the one thing that worries me about your solution, where we, depending on how you let the engineering happen to a better world, if you force that from the top down with the smart people, you're going to end up with a fucking disaster. Whereas if you clear the way for people to run a bunch of experiments, which may, and this wounds my soul, it may need to be at the country level, so that different countries can do wildly different experiments, and hey, whatever country wins. But part of winning is going to be either economically icing you out or dropping bombs on you. And so, man, any one person, that can be a very rough ride to see, because again, what's your North Star? What are we actually aiming at? For some, it might be just our GDP is higher than yours, or more people trade in our currency than yours. So it gets very weird very fast. So I think, yes, there are lots of differences, but there's also things we agree on. I think everybody agrees that trust in society is incredibly important, right? Some people think it's one of the most important contributors to GDP. Some people think it's less than the most important, but everybody agrees that it's important. I think the idea that countries need to take collective actions is also true. I think the idea that people should obey the laws, and that creates lots of a virtuous cycle is also clear. There's some things we agree. You're right that what's the North Star, we would probably have some different opinions on, but there's some other general things that we would agree. I also agree with you that the way we have designed society, I think not purposefully, but the way we've designed society is to basically kind of prey on our weakest point as human beings. It's preying on our emotion. It's preying on our impulsivity. It's preying on our trust in information. It's preying on our loneliness. It's preying on all kinds of things, and this is the machinery that is incredibly dangerous. Now, the question is, how do we get out of this? I don't think there's one solution. So it's not as if I think, it's just government regulation. I think as individuals, we need to worry about our own resilience, friends, loved one, significant other. We need to give resilience to others. I think we need resilience against what? Against misinformation?
No.
Or corrosive information?
About resilience is about everything. So I'll give you my favorite story on resilience. There's a principle called secure attachment. And the standard story on secure attachment is the following. Imagine you're a parent, you have a 4-year-old kid, you go with them to the park, and you say, kid, go and play. And the kid goes and play on the swing and comes back 30 minutes later. If that happened, you have a kid with secure attachment. On the other hand, if you say, go and play, and every 90 seconds they look to see if you're still waiting for them, not so successful. Now, for me, if I think about that means that you walk around the world with kind of a feeling that you have an insurance policy for everything. Usually if you think about life and you say sometimes bad things happen, and resilience is how much we jump back. Do we bounce back to where we were? Do we bounce back to a better place, a worse place? How fast? That's usually resilience. Secure attachment is without anything bad happens. It's about what is your attitude to life? How much do you feel that if something bad will happen, somebody will catch you? And if you feel that if something bad will happen, somebody will catch you, you become, your force in the world is becoming very different. You can take risks. You can try different things. right? You could, if you think that nobody will be there to catch you, what's the chance you will start a new company, take a risk, and so on? Very, very, very low. So this sense of resilience, a secure attachment, is incredibly important in a society. Now, if each of us took a stock and said, if we fell on hard time, if we were hospitalized, if we lost a loved one, if we got bankrupt, name a few of those things, who can we trust? If you have a long list, or at least a list with a few names on it, you have some sense in the world that you can dare. And if you say, no, there's nobody, I will be alone. If that happens, now you're in a very, very different world. So can we give that, how do we give that sense to ourselves and to others? And on the individual level, right? Think about your friends and say to yourself, what can you do to give your friends and family a higher feeling of secure attachment? How would you create it for yourself? And I think we don't think enough about that. But I think that's on the individual level. So secure attachment, resilience to ourselves, to others, stop ostracizing, be more cognitive of how we consume information and how we share it, multiple opinions, intellectual humility. There's lots of things we could do on the individual level. I think that's kind of the starting point. But we can't stop there. I don't think it'll be enough. I think the big forces of corrosive information are out there, and they're getting worse. So if you think about this notion of shibolet and identity, it's getting worse, right? We are now in a situation where politicians, for example, can say things that are clearly false. They're saying it just as a mark of identity, and we let it go. That problem will not solve itself. But we as a society have to figure out mechanisms against that. Because if a politician is saying something and they're saying it for identity, but you think it's fact, we're now in trouble.
So how do we inoculate ourselves against that?
So that one I don't know. I mean, you started our discussion with complaining that I don't give enough solutions. So, I think the individual solutions are important. Oh, before I do that, AI is certainly going to make this problem more complex.
1,000 times harder.
Yes. And usually...
By the way, for people following your Twitter feed, your X feed, you posted 2 videos.
Yes.
That are clearly deep fakes.
Yeah.
Did you post them knowing that they were deep fakes? Or
of
were
course.
You? Okay, yeah, I was just making sure.
Yeah, a friend made them for me. Yeah. So I dedicated the book to Trump. I kind of wrote the dedication of the book to Trump and to Elon Musk, thanking them for different types of inspiration and so on. I also thanked other people, but I didn't post those videos. And a friend made a deep fake video of Trump and a fake video of Elon Musk thanking me and taking this thing further. But yes, I knew. So usually when we think about systems, like think about driving, with cars, and especially with autonomous vehicles, we think that the human link is going to be the weak one. That machines are better and humans are going to be the weak link, right? Every time people fly, we have more accidents if machine flies. When people type, we have more spelling mistakes than if machine. I mean, in many, many ways, we think humans make more mistakes. Once you introduce AI with the power to deceive and to create corrosive information, human beings are going to be the strong point. Just because technology is going to be so terrible that we have to work on.
Yeah, but humans are going to use those tools.
Some people would use it. What I'm saying is as end users, we need to get much better at this, right? So if you say, as an end user with cars, humanity will be better off if you stop driving. as an end user of information, humanity will be, you need to stop trusting and start relying on yourself. Like that's the difference, right? That if in many other aspects, like take physicians, we want physicians to rely more on algorithms and more on automated surgery and all kinds of tools like that. In the world of consuming information, because what I think AI will do to that, you want people to rely more on themselves and less on the technology. We want people to trust less, be more critical, have more intellectual humility, all of those things. We need to improve ourselves, right? It's not like with driving, you don't say, oh, let's solve the driving problem by getting people to drive better. You're saying, no, let's replace it with technology. Here, technology is going to be very different. So I think we do need to improve our own skills, but then there will need some things that social networks will have to change and regulations will have to change. And, the way that regulations work is that we find out bad things that we do and then we fix it later. Sometimes it takes a really long time. Here it's also important to figure out what are the things that we're doing badly. And now let's start regulating that. So, we don't have rules against lying. You can't lie in court, right? There's rules against that. If you're a pharma company, you can't lie in your ads and that. But other than that, and you can't lie in a way that would get somebody else to lose money. But if you think about what's happening, for example, in the US, this corrosive information is costing all of us a lot, right? It's not an individual that is losing, but mistrust in our institution is costing all of us a lot. Very hard to think about how to quantify it, but if we started to quantify it, we would say, oh my goodness, when people start trusting the government and starting the healthcare system and this is incredibly expensive for us. So now we're starting to realize that corrosive information is costly and dangerous and has lots of implications, and we need to figure out how we're going to regulate it. We can't just let it go continuously. Like, let's take food. We found out that, heroin is not that good. And we said, okay, here's some restrictions on how to use it. Meth, not so good. Here's some restrictions against that. I think with information, we're getting there. We're getting to things that are incredibly devastating for people.
What do you think about free speech?
Okay, so I think about everything in a cost-benefit way. There's not a single principle that I would say that I'm 100% sure that it's the right one. I think free speech is a wonderful principle. All else being equal, I prefer free speech to no free speech. But if I'm convinced that the costs outweigh the benefits, but I need to be convinced of that, I'm willing to restrict everything, not just free speech. Society is moving in such ways that it is not clear to me that a good world is consistent with all of those principles. For example, free speech is wonderful, but trust is also wonderful, and people not hating each other is also wonderful. And now, when you understand that free speech, the way it's being utilized, has a cost on these other things, we are in a cost-benefit way. And you can say, I don't care about everything else. Free speech is about above all. And that's not an empirical perspective. It's an ideological perspective. On an empirical side, I would say, if you can convince me with data that the cost of free speech outweigh the benefits, then I'm willing to consider what kind of limitation I'm willing to have.
Yeah. The only way that we'd be able to do that is first, people have to agree on what we're trying to accomplish. This is why, going back to the example you used of education, this is where that all breaks down. What is our aim? What are we trying to do? Because this is measurable and we're either hitting it or we're not hitting it. And if we're not hitting it, then we have to do something new. And if the structures that we have don't allow us to hit that, then the structures have to change. But
so some things you're absolutely right, but there are some things that are low-hanging fruit. So for example, again, we know very little about education, but one of the things we know is that the differences between good schools and not so good schools are less about what the kids learn during the year and more about what they forget in the summer. Right? Kids who have an amazing environment and summer camps and homes that teach them don't forget much in the summer, maybe they even learn. And kids that come from impoverished neighborhoods forget a lot in the summer. Once you understand this, you say, let's move to something like the KIPP schools where they're all year round. Let's not have a three months summer vacation. Let's make the vacation.
But is that your intuition about the KIPP schools? Is that it's just the fact that they're year round? To me, it's the militant, identity driven. We don't do that here. There are very strict rules. You adhere or you don't. It gives them something to aspire to. It gives them bright lines to adhere to. Like, I've been trying. Do you know Jeffrey Canada?
No.
Oh God, I've got to find this guy. Like, I am desperate to get that man on this show. We have tried and tried and tried. Anyway, the whole idea.
It's an amazing organization.
Unbelievable.
And they certainly have more than just that. But I gave you that as an example because that's a factor that we know works. We know that the summer forgetting is a big deal. Discipline and so on have a lot of intuitions around it and reasons, and I can play the logic of why it happens and for what kids it will be happening and so on. Not my field, but I've not seen the evidence for that yet. It might be that it exists, but I don't see it. But you're right that there are some things that are high-hanging fruit that we'll need to decide, what is the goal of education? And you and I will probably agree that we want kids to keep on having the thirst for knowledge, and we want people to be flexible, and we could define a few things that we'll probably agree, but there's also some basics that we would also agree, and not forgetting would certainly be one of them. But I gave the education one as an example because it's so difficult to experiment with. But I think that, and I gave it on purpose, right? Because here's a domain that we find it morally objectionable to experiment. But in some level, we have to. Because how are we going to make any progress?
It doesn't feel true to me. So I have a different take on that. This is not an area I'm super familiar with. I'm shooting from the hip. I am outside of my realm of expertise. I want to fully acknowledge that. But at the same time, I believe people have an obligation to themselves and the world to articulate how they would approach a novel problem. Okay, so knowing that I'm approaching this as a novel problem, I look at that and I say, okay, let each school run its own experiment. Let it be an experiment. The KIPP schools started out as an experiment. Many of them were started in the same building that the normal public school is in. They take people on a completely randomized lottery. So it's not even like it selects for, better kids or whatever. And so right there, you have two different schools. And if you could, that are both experiments, and you could let the parents decide, hey, what kids do you want to, or what school do you want to send your kids to? Boom, now we see which experiment works, which one doesn't. I understand there are going to be a lot of complexities in terms of federal dollars and things like that.
Just to be clear, the moment you let the parents choose, the experiment is not as good.
Why?
Because now you have self-selection.
Okay.
So imagine that you have school A and school B, and you let the parents choose. The parents follow their intuition of whether my kid will be better in school A and school B, but now the schools get very different kids. So it's much easier, you can't compare anymore. That's what's called self-selection, right? That in an experiment, one of the things you want is that you randomizely assign people to conditions.
Yeah, but don't you think that if you do that, like with KIPP, that same pool of students in the same building, but different teachers, different mentality, you get these wildly different outcomes that we can look at that and go, ooh, I'd rather have my kid in the KIPP school than the normal school.
I'm saying if the experiment gives the parents a choice, then it's already not a good experiment. But I'll give you another example for this. So when I was in the burn department, there was a treatment called the Jobs pressure bandages. And it was because I have burns all over, I had it was like a Superman, but ugly brown. So, no, a Spider-Man. So I had a shirt, very tight, and it was supposed to hold the scars and create pressure. So I had legs, I had a shirt, long sleeve shirt, I had 2 gloves, and I had one on my head. So really the only things you could see were my eyes, ears, mouth, and brown Spider-Man kind of walking around. I walked with a hat. It felt a little bit less strange, but that's what it was. And I asked the doctors, is there good evidence that this is working? And they gave me a paper, but the paper did not have a control group. They didn't compare half the people yes, half the people no. And I said, look, I don't know if this is really working. How do you know that it's working? And one of the things I proposed to them, I said, look, the upper thighs, I don't have scars. Why don't you take an iron and give me equivalent scar on the left and equivalent scar on the right? Put me to sleep. I don't want to be awake when you give me this burn, but give me equivalent burns, temperature and duration. And let's put the jobs on one leg and not on the other leg, and let's see if it's all working. And I said, I think that there's going to be generations of burn patients that are going to get this terrible treatment. It's very tough, right? It's hard to move. You're not free. It's very, very hot. It's itching. It's sometimes when I would put it on, it would tear the delicate skin, and not without cost. The treatment. And I said, look, I'm willing to be a guinea pig for this. Give me. And by the way, I think every burn patient will be willing to do it, because we have kind of a tremendous camaraderie with all the next generation of burn patients. And they couldn't do it. They said on ethical reasons. And I can see why ethically it's complex, but you can see why ethically it's also complex not to do it. Now, generations of burn patients are getting a treatment that I don't know if it's effective, because we're not willing ethically to do the experiment. So I love experiments. And there are many experiments, and that's what I was going with the education. There are many experiments that we're not willing to do ethically. But at the same time, not doing an experiment also has an ethical cost. And the ethical cost is we're not learning how to do it better, and we're subjecting future generations to worse off treatments. So that's for me is the issue. I love experiments. I think it's the only way truly to learn something because of our biases. And if we don't have that compared to the control condition, we never know if this is actually better or worse. Mm-hmm. How do we get a culture of doing experiments even when they are difficult and complex and painful, and even if we don't believe, even if we're sure that the experiment would yield a certain result and so on? That for me is a big issue for us.
So I feel like the problem might be something else more tied to misbelief than anything, because countries are already running their own experiments. We can look at a lot of different countries, see how they handle education. The problem is that we have very different North Stars. So China's North Star, we are going to run this bitch. Like, they're here to run the table, just in no uncertain terms. And so the way that they run their education is in alignment with that. If what I hear about the TikTok algorithm is really true, and that in China, they're like showing you kids that win the science fair, and in America, it's the best dancers and people doing dumb shit.
Really? Is that what you hear?
That's what I hear. I haven't looked at it, so I don't know if that's actually true. But it's certainly, from a psychological warfare perspective, it would be very wise for them to do that. But anyway, there's a lot to look at. I think that we're not looking at it because we are so entrenched in these different camps. And so bringing this back to the thing I want to get out of all this is I want people to understand everything that you lay out in the book resonated with me very, very much. People go down these funnels of misbelief. They develop a core identity around something. The only thing that I think you and I may disagree on is I think everybody has
Yeah.
misbeliefs. I don't think it's like, oh, one subset of people. I get it. There are people that are more prone to maybe certain styles of misbelief, but none of us see the world as it actually is.
I don't think we disagree on that. Again, the first figure in the book is showing that conspiracies are not about being left or right. Everybody thinks that the other side is conspiratorial. They are held by all sides of the political spectrum, and there are things that we all hold. And there's a couple of exercises that basically get people to recognize, I hope, some of our misbeliefs. So. I talked on some radio about misbeliefs, and somebody wrote and complained that I gave examples of people on the right, that I do not give enough examples on people on the left and conspiracies. And of course, he was right, and it's because cancel culture is so powerful. The left has its own issues. But giving examples of specific things that the left is doing in a crazy way, the identity around it is so powerful that it's even hard to say the words because
people will come after you.
That's right.
Which you've had a lot of in the last few years.
That's right.
Which you talked about earlier in the interview. I didn't want to distract from the points you were making, but it's a really potent example of what happens when people grab onto an idea and they need the villain and they need somebody to be wrong. Yeah. But it's also an example of, okay, like what is the truth? Are you going to be able to convince people? I know people were comparing you to Goebbels, which for anybody that knows, the Nazi propagandist, that seems a little outrageous.
Yeah. There's a way to look at it as a compliment. I was the chief consciousness architect for the COVID pandemic. Like you could say, oh my goodness, that's a compliment.
It's certainly high level.
But not really. No, the psychology of being attacked is very tough. I would say that in the first month when I would try to have conversations, but also for the next 2 years, like every day that I would get a death threat, I'm sure I lost a few IQ points for that day.
Because you were so preoccupied.
Yeah, I would say that in the beginning, it felt like I lost 20%. Like I would try to focus. And I would feel like there's something really missing, that I was not as quick and I was not, but I was slower, and so on. And then part of it was social media related. Some of it was like, my computer bings with something, or what is this? So I open my email, which ones are going to be hurting, and so on. There was a point where people attacked me in the street.
That's crazy.
That was very, very tough. Really. Did you ever have a car accident?
Yes.
So I had a motorcycle accident once, and everything felt like in slow motion. So you had the same?
Yeah.
And being attacked like this was the same. I don't think it lasted very long. Somebody kept on calling me a murderer and a psychopath, and somebody else joined. It felt like in slow motion for a very long time. It was such a bizarre experience. But I felt very much this drain of intelligence and stress and so on. And we talked about how people are looking for a villain and looking for a story. In some sense, this book, it struck me only when I finished it. In some sense, this book is the way I dealt with the stress. I was attacked, I was stressed. How did I solve it? I found the story and I found the villain. And the story is the book, and the villain is eventually the combination of human nature and society and so on. It's not a simple story, it's a complex story as well. But it is so negative. Like if you ask me about how people feel in cancel culture, and what are the lengths that people are willing to go to reshape their understanding and change what they're willing to say and so on. It's tremendous because it's such a feeling. It's such a devastating feeling. Even I feel of it like the last time I got a death threat was 4 days ago, but the rate is going down. It's not every day anymore.
Hey.
But there was a very, very long, very, very tough period, and now we're in Hollywood. This is Hollywood, right? It's ish. Since I came here, I heard lots of stories about people who've been recently been canceled. I can imagine now that feeling, and I think I can imagine the lengths that people would go not in a healthy way, not in a good way for society.
Yeah.
Groupthink.
Yeah. So that was going back to the initial premise. The thing that I want to help people do is be able to think independently, to not get caught up in groupthink, to be able to outperform the vast majority of the world. My hypothesis goes like this. You need massive amounts of humility. You need to completely distrust yourself because, again, this is me. People need a North Star. I highly advise fulfillment. And to actually get where you want to go, you have to be able to get as close to ground truth as possible so that you know, okay, well, if I try this, I'm going to get this outcome. You're going to be off. You're going to refine. But you have to stare nakedly at your own inadequacies in that moment where you're assessing, did what I just try worked or not? Because you're going to be able to come up with a compelling narrative as to why either it wasn't your fault, which is what most people do. I'm a victim, I'm whatever. There's all these reasons outside of my control why this didn't work. It doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm a good person. I can still feel good. You'll stay stalled out forever. You'll never figure out exactly why what happened. And so you have to stop and say, okay, I'm going to point all 10 fingers of responsibility back at myself. What can I do differently in order to get a different outcome? Now, once you click over into that zone, I should say to click over into that zone, you can't build your self-esteem around being right. And this is where the I need to feel good about myself derails people down the funnel of misbelief. If instead, you even mentioned this in the book, this is a central thesis of my life. If you have a growth mindset, you are not prone to going down the funnel of misbelief because your identity is not tied up in a belief or something you've said. Your identity is tied up in identifying what works and getting better so that you can execute against that. So anytime that you notice you're falling short, you can improve.
So intellectual humility and experimentation go hand in hand, right? Because the moment you say, I'm not really sure, then you go and test multiple things. I have my own version of what you said. So my version of this is believing in karma. And there are many definitions, but for me, karma is the law of cause and effect. And it means that when we do good things, the odds of other good things happen is higher, and when we do bad things...
For mystical reasons or because humans are a social creature?
Not mystical. Yeah, just because the way the world works, right? You do a favor to somebody, you do positive things, you increase the probability that something good would happen. But no, not mystical. But you do something negative, you increase the chances that something bad will happen down the line. But it's probabilistic. I don't know if the percentage, but there's a small percentage improvement. But for me, this notion of karma is connected with the idea that we don't judge ourselves based on the outcome, but we judge ourselves on what we do. Because you say, I've done a good thing, I ended my job here, and now it's the world's turn. And it's statistic, it's going to be probabilistic. It could turn out to be good, it could turn out to be bad, but my responsibility ends where I finish doing my job at the best ability possible. But for me, that changes my framework from judging myself based on outcomes to judging myself on whether I think I've fulfilled my duty.
That's really interesting. You and I view the world very differently. So that's clear. I have heard you. I will steelman your argument that there is a right way to live. There are right things to do, that we have duties and obligations to each other as a species, and the world is far too complex. So all you can do is say, did I adhere to my duty? Yes or no? And if I did, then hey, amazing. And if it ends up backfiring and being a problem, too complicated. There's nothing I can do beyond that. That's beyond myself. Have I understood your position accurately?
No, because you've taken away, you've taken one part of it. And I don't think that I always know the right thing to do. So you're connecting karma and certainty. For me, they're not connected. They're separate issues. So I would say, based on what I know right now, I'm doing the best I can. And it could include learning and improving and all kinds of other things. But the notion is that my obligation is to act in my best ability right now, but my responsibility, I don't judge myself based on whether it worked out. I judge myself, did I adhere to my current standards? So I don't want it to be seen that I think that there's absolute standards of behavior. Everybody has their own.
But what's that built around? Is it for you personally? Is everybody building a moral code? Is it a religious code?
It is about the particular project. So I'll give you an example. During COVID, I designed a program that I thought could reduce domestic violence against kids. There was a huge increase. And I had this idea of what would work. I talked to lots of experts and I designed something. I worked very hard on it. And it turned out that for legal reasons, we couldn't introduce it to schools. Should I feel bad about this or not? Like, I felt terrible. I felt terrible because I felt that this was going to be good and I was disappointed it didn't work. But I also said, I took a real problem that pains me and I did my best to try and push something forward. It was what I thought was the best solution that I could help. And I tried to basically say, I did what I thought was right. I'm really disappointed it didn't work out, but I'm not going to judge myself and saying next time I'm only going to do things if I know that they'll work out. No, I said, I want, like when I see problems and I have solutions that are low probability events, but might work in this, I still want to reinforce that behavior. So imagine the human being as a learning algorithm and you're saying, what behaviors do you want to reinforce? And I think that low probability, high stakes success is great to reinforce. But it means that to reinforce that, people need to reinforce what they do and not the outcome. Like, let's just take, you have a set of amazing ideas that each of them has 5% chance of working out. If you base it on reward, most time you would say, you failed. 19 out of 20 times you would say you failed. If you basically move to a situation, you did your best in each of those, you would reinforce more of those. So that's what I mean by karma, is that I want to reinforce, by the way, it's not just in me, but in everybody, like with experiments at the university, right? The people who work with me, I don't want them to judge themselves on whether the experiment worked or not work, because then there's a really easy shortcut. Do trivial experiments. I want people to do risky experiments that we don't know if they will work or not work. We'll learn the most out of them.
So the thing that tripped you up in my steel manning your argument is certainty.
It's the outcome. It's the
Well, I said that. So all I'm trying to do is faithfully articulate what you're saying. Yeah. What I hear you saying.
Oh, I see. When you say about what me, yeah. So when your complaint about my statement.
My complaint? I don't have a complaint.
No complaint, but the challenge that you said that we're.
Well, first I just want to see if I understand it.
With the fair is about the fact that I think that for me doing the right thing is not a universal principle. And it can change over time, and I'm committed to learning and improving and so on. But given what I know right now, I want to feel fulfilled. I want people around me to be fulfilled when they have done their best and not depend on an outcome.
Yeah, so I agree, but I want to make sure that I articulate your point in a way that you say, yes, I understand. What I hear you saying is that you cannot guarantee the outcome. Because you can't guarantee the outcome, it doesn't make sense to judge somebody, their endeavors based on the outcome. Far better to say, did you do that thing sincerely? Did you really give it a shot? And if you really gave it a shot, regardless of whether it ends up being successful, is irrelevant, because the behavior that you want to reinforce is a sincere attempt to do something. You said risky, seems like a reasonable word, but risky in a way that like it really has a chance of adding value to some group or humanity at large, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I actually get that. And in my own life, I say, I don't value myself for whether I succeed or fail. I value myself for the sincere pursuit of something.
Yeah.
But my whole life is predicated on steering by not my intentions, but by my outcome. And so the subtle difference, because I think you and I are basically saying the same thing, but the thing that drives me like a maniac is this slight tweak on it, which is I really believe that I can bend the world to my will, but I have to exist in the physics of progress. And so I have to go, ooh, I thought I was going to get X result and I didn't get X result. And that means I need to do something different in order to get X result. And if I attempt this enough times and I refine, that I'll ultimately be able to get there.
Yeah. And I think we agree because you're saying once you're into something, that's the journey. But once the journey is over, there's an evaluation. And the evaluation should create a sense for improvement, right? I don't think that if something doesn't work, you should learn nothing from it. You should certainly learn from it and try to improve for the next time. But I think both of those are important. It's the not being sure, testing multiple things, and rewarding effort rather than outcome in the short term, because we think that rewarding effort in the long term would be the right approach.
So along those lines, as somebody that's seen misbelief so up close, what's the move? Like, what do you do from here? Keeping in mind, what I'm trying to answer for the people that are watching right now is precisely how they should be approaching this problem.
So individually, I think invest in your own resilience. Secure
so that you can deal with it.
Yeah, so you can deal with stress, because if you understand the role of stress, then you...
And that resilience is built strong family life, people that you love and care about.
Family, friends, yes. Stop bickering with your significant other. but we do so many things that reduce resilience. We not intentionally, but we do lots of those things. So it's like having high level of trust and resilience with your close environment, unbelievably important for you and for others. And that's number one. When you identify people early on in the funnel of misbelief, help them. I use the heading hug a misbeliever, but these people are really suffering, and they're going to suffer more, and their suffering is going to have consequences for them, for you, for society. Try to do early detection in your environment.
If I can predict why you say they're suffering. They're suffering because the funnel of misbelief starts with somebody who's incredibly stressed, somebody who's probably feeling ostracized, somebody that's being pushed into the arms of people that agree with what they agree with. And they need that because they're not getting it anywhere else. They probably also have personality traits that lead them to believe, would you call them falsehoods? Anyway, so negative things lead all of us down this path. And so when you see somebody heading down that path, it's probably indicative of something bad has happened. Yeah,
just imagine somebody who believes in God. They basically wake up and they say, oh, the world is good. Yes, there's devils sometimes, but it's mostly good. And there's an entity that takes care of me in principle and so on. Now take a misbeliever. We say it's the lens from which they view everything, or the glasses in which they view everything, and they mistrust and so on. Think about how difficult it is to wake up like this. You wake up and you feel that there's a network of pedophiles that is trying to take your kids, and they're trying to implant a G5 chip in them, and they're trying to make sure that they don't they don't see nature. Just think about what all the terrible things that that people live. Then I think a lot of our discussion, so that's you know the emotional element and a little bit of not ostracizing people on that side. But a lot of what we talked about is the cognitive part, right? How do we keep multiple hypotheses? How do we keep the idea that we might be wrong? How do we inject it on ourselves? So we gave two little party tricks. One is what will it take to change your mind, and the other one is the illusion of explanatory depth. But those are attacking the cognitive component when you say to yourself, I don't want to be 100% sure in anything that is going to color my worldview, or at least I'm going to be very, very cautious before I get there. And that's the individual level, and I think that's the level that we're talking here. But I'm also hoping that we will do other things, that we'll create different social networks, that will think about different standards for politicians, for opinions, not just politicians, for anybody who is speaking. I think those are important progress, but not something that you and I could do individually.
Do you have a thesis on what change you want to see?
So let's take the example of social media. I don't want people to be deprived of misbelief in conspiracy theories.
I mean, be deprived.
Like one approach is to censor. So social network X is not allowing flat earther to share anything.
There now really is a social network X.
Yes,
that's the problem.
That's right.
You mean random social network?
That's right, random. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean that. I don't think that's healthy. I think we need to learn to deal with different opinions, and I think we need to learn to deal with conspiracy theories. But it's a question of what's the right mix? What mix do we want to expose ourselves to, or what kind of mix do I want my kids to expose themselves to? I don't want them to. I don't want it for B to be zero. I think they need to. I'm hoping to be there with them when they consume some of those things and develop the ability to not just believe, but suspend belief and question and test things more generally. But I think that's an example of how do we regulate the mix? We think about pieces of information. I think that's not the right level of analysis. I think the right level of analysis is the person, and what are they exposed to as a person? Because I'm fine for anybody to be exposed to videos, let's just say, not things that I don't know what. There's some things that probably not, but I'm willing for everybody to be exposed to videos of name the conspiracy theory. I don't want people to start being exposed 100% to that. So we need to think about that. Another simple thing is that the action of liking or promoting or whatever it is very ambiguous. When I like something, what am I really saying? Do I say it's true? Do I say it's ridiculous? Do I say it's funny? In a regular conversation, you would know what I mean. And if I say something, hey, look at this is ridiculous. Can you believe somebody else believes that? That will be very different than saying, I think this is true. But the way social networks are created, everything is ambiguous. And you can understand why they do it, but that's not how we're consuming it. And the people who are sharing it don't get to convey their meaning to the people who are consuming it. Right? You said social proof. People say lots of likes. So must be true. No, it might be that it's ridiculous. It doesn't mean that. So I think we have a lot of solutions that we need to figure out there. I don't know if they will do it themselves. Do we need to create some standards? I don't know what it is. But if you think about language, just what like is, and you say when these social networks are not allowing likes to express the range of what people mean, we have a terrible communication gap. And then we have to think about what we do with the First Amendment. I think it's, we started talking about...
Because you want to curtail it?
So, we'll go back to the experiment. Remember, I would love to go on a journey that explores the downside of free speech. And if at the end of this journey, I would be convinced empirically that the downside outweighs the positives, then I would start exploring better ways to do it. There are some things we don't allow already, right? I don't think necessarily we're doing the right thing. So, there's things against violence and sex for young kids. We've decided that those two categories are important, and we're not questioning that, right? But I'm not sure that some of the things we're making it free for our kids are not worse than those two. Like how did we decide? Like what was the mechanism that got us to decide that seeing a nipple is, what is it, like rated R? I don't know what, but whatever, that you can't see a nipple, or maybe you can see a gun, but you can't see a punch.
You see a gun or a nipple, but not a gun and a nipple. Yeah, I get all that.
So we have curtailed. We have decided as a society that we're willing, that these are things that are taboo, that we're not allowing kids in certain ages and their rules. I don't think those things have ever been tested. Somebody decided, I don't like that. I want things to be tested, and I think that some of the things we're exposing ourselves are worse than those. Right? Is a conspiracy, is exposing people to a cabal that is smuggling kids for sexual gratification. Like where does it stand on the scale? How do we think about it? What about the conspiracy that the FDA is controlled by a person Y? I guess we can't use X anymore, probably soon for anything. So I like an empirical approach. And by the way, this is my guess is that the sex and the violence were done with zero evidence, with just intuition about what would be negative for kids.
What do you think about Jordan Peterson's idea that speech is effectively thinking, and if you're curtailing people's speech, you're curtailing what they think and their ability to think, and thusly you are making it impossible for people to think through difficult problems well?
Yeah, it's not that I think that I don't take free speech lightly. I just watched this amazing documentary on Floyd Abrams on the important free First Amendment lawyer. That I mean, just really, it's an incredibly important thing. But again, I take nothing as saying that I'm not willing to trade it off. There are people that are single issue voters. This is it. It's all about guns, abortions, gay rights. I think that everything is a trade-off. And I think that for most things, we don't understand them sufficiently deeply, and we're just in the beginning of the journey, and we need to understand it, and we need to keep on willing to change it later on. So, for example, if let's say we found out that there's a particular speech that we all agree empirically is more hurtful than sex and nudity. And we said this particular speech, speech L, is prohibited. I don't want to say this is it. We'll keep on developing new speeches, right? This needs to be an ongoing project on figuring out what's damaging and what trade-offs we're willing to make. Like the world we're in now, 10 years ago, if I asked you 10 years ago, what are the challenges that are facing human nature, human society? What are the big challenges? Misbelief would not have been one of them. Now, it's certainly one of them. Society is changing. Technology is changing. We need to change our rules and regulations accordingly. 20 years ago, we wouldn't think that we need to do a law against texting and driving. Now, certainly texting and driving is killing way too many people. So this is a living system. Social science, unlike physics, Physics has not changed for a very long time. Social science changes all the time because the things that tap our irrationality keep on changing, and the type of mistakes we make keep on changing. So we need to change with it.
Interesting. Okay, so for me, as I think about trying to put together a mental framework that's going to protect myself, I don't see how we build a mental framework without having a North Star, a thing that we're aiming at. So rather than asking you to give something that everybody can use, what's the mental framework that you use?
I don't think it's very different than yours. So you have your North Star is very general, and it's subjected to change because the language that you use is general, right? You're not saying, I know the one way to get fulfilled and to improve myself and humanity. You kept it at a very high level on purpose. And you say, and I'm not sure exactly what the path. In fact, I probably don't know the path, and I'll keep on learning about it. So I like your framework very much. I think that as people, we have this beautiful thing called social utility. We care about others. It's a beautiful thing. We have this capacity to care about others. And I think we need to build it up, not crush it and tell people that they need to be selfish. I think we need to build it up. I think it's good for people. I think it's good for society. I think we tap into some of the good things about irrationality, right? In the standard rational framework, people are selfish. There's some good things about irrationality. We love, we like poetry, we create art, we care about others. So I think that creating a goal of fulfilling ourselves by improving other people's lives, I think is a wonderful abstract goal, as long as you don't say, I know what is the exact way to do it. And then the rest of the things, you said, it's a journey, right? We don't know, and we are committed to exploring it. We're committed to investing effort to test things that we think work but don't work, and the other way around, and to continue working. And I think those two elements are great. So I would stick with yours. I would add the component of karma. I would say that because it's a long-term journey, I want people to try things that have low probability, high payoff. But if you think about the risk-return world, you say, I really want people to try low probability, high returns. So I want to reward effort, not outcomes, and that's great. Oh, and then if we add one more thing, I would say plus. If you think about the energy that is required to do all of that, I think that energy needs a good base in resilience. So if you think about a world in which says, how do you get people to wake up in the morning and be willing to take steps and take risks and try something and doubt themselves and so on, you want them to be not in stress, and you want them to feel to high resilience, because the human motivation aspect, the way you've defined your objective, doesn't have the place where you derive energy to do it from. And I think the
doesn't have?
Not enough. Like you say, it's about the goal, it's about, but what gets you on a day-to-day basis to be willing to take these extra steps? And I think resilience is one of the things that supports this. Now, think to yourself, you told me a little bit about your start, what it means to live in a world where you have partners that you can trust, and to be in an environment where, I mean, those are incredibly important elements.
Yeah, agreed very much. I'm not sure that I understand what you mean. So part of my formula is that it's got to be something that you care about and serves yourself as well as other people. And then anyway, I've got a whole thing about how you build desire and all that, but I do very much agree with.
But so what do you mean by resilience? So you can have all of these good intentions, but let's say you wake up one day and you feel this scarcity mindset. What are the odds that you could take long-term actions, that you could invest? The mindset that you have to fulfill yourself is a mindset where you can say, I can take risks, and I don't need to worry about being canceled, and I don't need to worry about expressing my opinion. Psychological safety is so important in the workplace. Why? Because if we tell people, don't express your ideas, what are we hoping to get out of them? So this support network is incredibly important to allow you to have the energy that you want to fulfill yourself. Now, my guess is that you have built your life in a way that you have a lot of this, so much that you don't notice it.
No, that's an area that I'm hyper aware of. I just use a different phrase, which is the people with the strongest relationships or strongest home life take the biggest risks. So very, very, very much agree with that. So the only thing I think that there might be a slight difference in is that idea of duty, that there's a right way to do something. And as long as I did that, for me, I just have an extra thing that matters to me, whether this is what everybody needs to adopt or not. I don't know. I don't think of it like that. But for someone to live a fulfilling life, I feel like they need to have a sense of control and agency in their life. And to have that, you have to exist in the physics of progress. To do that, when something doesn't go right, you have to say, okay, then there's something wrong with my base assumptions. There's something wrong with the distortion in the lenses through which I view the world. I'm not at ground truth. Because I'm not at ground truth, I have missed something. And so I just need to look and figure out what that thing is. Yeah. But I think ultimately we're very, very close in terms of...
I will say one other thing, that when you said passion, so one of the things I'm finding myself these days, that I am able to find passion in many different projects. So 3 weeks ago, I was in Brazil, and I went to visit some of the favelas, the places where people live illegally, very, very tough places, no sewage, poverty, violence, drugs, you name it. And I came to visit an organization that is trying to get these favelas out of poverty, kind of an amazing organization. And their question was, what is the best investment to get people out of poverty? What's the marginal contribution of investing in domestic violence, in reducing domestic violence, reducing violence that is not domestic, in helping people find jobs, in getting kids to go to school, in getting sewage? Just the number of problems is incredible. More food, more health. Just the number of problems is amazing. Where is the marginal? Where is the marginal thing? Now, that problem was not high on my lists before, but going and visiting for a few days certainly got me to start. It became very high on my list. Just thinking about it, there's about 200 million people in Brazil. About 20 of them are in this. 20 million are in this, in these conditions. And I think that my motivation, if you show me 3 projects and you ask me where I think I would have the biggest impact, I think I would pick just the one that I think I can have the biggest impact. So and maybe this is different than you, but it's not that I say, oh, poverty is my thing, or health is my thing, or end of life, and so on. I just look at the world and I say, where can I make an impact? It's kind of my starting point. And I think I could get excited with anything as long as I felt that I could make an impact and it's within my reach. So the fact that my knowledge is relevant and I have agency and I could help, I think I could be excited with very different topics. And you seem to have specific topics that excite you.
Yeah, I think that if I had to guess, going back to your favela problem, one, it fits into a type of problem that you find interesting, like what this social rat's nest, how do we begin to untangle that? That's sort of the theme of all your books. Also, I mean, look, part of it is you went there, you saw the people. This is
Yeah.
what I
That's
call when I talk about building desire, people have to find people that are real, that they can picture, that they ideally know and love, and they want to do something to help them, or at least people like them. So yes, I think all of us ultimately have what I call the world of. There's a world of things that we like to be around. And so the more, like, if you're huge into soccer, but you're an accountant, well, go figure out how an accountant can help a soccer club.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things like that. But yeah, I could, and have, when I was in nutrition, I was in nutrition. I wasn't like thinking, oh, I'm going to get out of this. I was like, hey, I'm going to find a way to connect to this and really build something here. Again, just this, everything comes back to me that there is a physics to the human mind. And once you understand the physics of the human mind, we actually talked about this briefly, but we didn't go deep into it, but you can reattribute your emotions. So you're walking across the bridge, you have a heightened arousal, you meet an attractive woman, at least subconsciously, they were reattributing the emotion from the bridge to the woman. Now you can actually take a hold of that process and say, okay, every time I explain to people why I'm building, let's say, impact theory, every time I say it, I'm going to explain my whole mission in life is to make sure that nobody gets to the age of 15 without encountering a growth mindset at scale through ideas and entertainment. Okay, why does that matter? And then I'll tell them my past, and I tell it in a very animated way. Why do I do that? Because I know that my brain is going to justify whatever amplitude of emotion I repeat. Mm-hmm. So if I'm constantly like, you don't understand how much this matters to me, man. If I do that enough, it really starts to seep in. And so this is why your books, many of your books, have been so instrumental for me, because they're putting their finger on these just weird quirks of human psychology. And what I hope people are getting out of this is, if you understand what's happening, not only can you avoid the trap of like sliding down the funnel into misbelief, but you can also go, oh, I know how this works. I get that my brain is going to justify these things. I'm going to have an intuition, and then a logical thing is going to come after that. Okay, I'm going to connect dots based on feelings. That's going to give me that illusion of explanatory depth where I think I understand this thing. Oh, but I don't. So cool. The next time I think I understand something, I'm going to force myself to write it down in a single sentence, or to draw out a blueprint of a toilet or whatever. And when I realize, oh shit, I can't, then that will be further proof. I can't trust my emotions, which is one of the things that I'm trying to get people to understand. You cannot trust your emotions. When you feel you're most convinced, that's when every alarm bell you have needs to be going off. Yep. And because I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs, I'm always telling them, look, the mind works in a certain way. Leadership is a certain thing because the mind works in a certain way. And when you're talking to your employees, you are going to have to give them certainty. You're going to intoxicate them with certainty. We're going to do this, and it's going to yield this. And trust me, just get behind me and execute like a demon, and this is all going to work. Then you need to go away and understand you have to challenge that. You have to go find disconfirming evidence. You have to figure out, because you know there's something wrong with your thesis. If there wasn't, you would already be where you plan to be, but you're not. And you're not because there's some piece of this that's missing. And so while externally you have to project certainty, because that's the way the mind works, you also have to distrust whatever certainty you have in yourself and call those beliefs into questions. There is a physics to the human mind. Yeah. And because there is physics to the human mind, there's physics to groups, because those minds collectively, they act in a certain way. And you've really mapped a lot of this territory out. And if people can begin to internalize the lessons, like when I look around and I see people trusting themselves, I'm like, Jesus Christ, like I'm jealous, I guess, a little bit, because I have so much mistrust for myself. Yeah. But at the same time, because I distrust myself, I've actually been able to go, I'm probably wrong about this. What am I missing? I'm open to new information. I have a high degree of openness to new ideas. And that's allowed me to constantly pull myself out of what would otherwise be traps, to listen to other people, and getting people there, getting people to distrust themselves, to me is and look, I understand this is a gross oversimplification, but if you want to avoid the traps of misbelief, you cannot trust yourself. Literally. When it feels right is when you should most be like, I know better than this. Yeah, I know better.
I'll give you one more anecdote for this. We did a study when I was still at MIT on simulations for jet engines. So there's all these programs that do simulations. And what we saw was that the more realistic the simulation looked, it looked like a real engine, in the graphics, the more people forgot the assumptions that went into the model. The more something looks real, the more you forget that it's just a fiction, it's based on simulation, and so on. And with deep fake, this issue about what do we trust? We have such trust in our eyes, eyewitness testimony, we trust our memory. I mean, the amount of undeserving trust that we have in ourselves, vision, memory, perception, decisions, certainly we need to question it much more.
No doubt. All right, talk to me about, in the social sciences, there is a replication crisis. So many of these things, they're amazing and they feel so right. And it lines up with what I believe. One of my favorite stories, I don't think this has anything to do with you, but one of my favorite ones was like, if you meet somebody and you have a hot mug, get them to hold the hot mug because then they'll think warm feelings of you. I was like, that's so dope. And then it can't be replicated. And so many things, including some of your own research, fails to replicate. How do we deal with that? Like, this seems to fall into the same sort of cognitive basket.
Yeah. So there are lots of different ways to think about it. Let me tell you about one example from mine, and kind of through that. So we ran an experiment on the 10 Commandments. We asked people to recall the 10 Commandments or recall 10 books, and then we gave them a task that they could cheat. And what we found was that the people who recalled the 10 Commandments cheated less. Okay, now there's another group that tries to replicate this study. And we did it in one place, and they do it in many places. They do it in many places, much more serious, and so on. Now, they don't replicate it exactly. They make some important differences. One important difference is in the cheating task. They use the same cheating task, but with a slightly different procedure. So we had a task where people could just say, I solved it or not. And in their version, they had to mark the correct answer. So there was a difference in there. And they run this experiment and it doesn't replicate. And they write this paper that says, failed to replicate. And lots of questions why. We asked them for the data. And what they actually did, so aside from making the experiment slightly different, but in an important way, they ran another experiment before that. So they ran this replication effort. A lot of people participated and so on. They said, let's replicate two things at the same time. So they ran two experiments, one after the other. And the first experiment annoyed people. And it annoyed them either at a 20% level or 80% level. But when we looked at their data for our experiment, we also looked at it as a function of the first experiment. And guess what? It matters. So now they thought they were replicating our experiment, but because they were running it after another one, they actually changed the results. Because when you annoy people, people respond differently to the 10 Commandments. I don't exactly understand why. So we said, look, this is an interesting thing, right? Social science is complex. Lots of things happen. It turns out, it looks like annoying people makes the effect of the 10 Commandments different. Not something I would expect, but it looks like that. So that's just based on their data. So we said, okay, let's repeat that. Let's annoy people and not annoy people. Let's test that this is indeed the case. And also, because when we ran the experiment originally, it was 2004, we learned a lot since then, and let's add more things to the mix. So we add more things to the mix. Do people need to know the 10 Commandments? Do they need to believe in them? And all kinds of things like that. And guess what? We find that annoyance matters. I don't exactly understand why, but it matters. We find that the 10 Commandments do make a difference, but it makes a difference only for the people who believe that it captures some moral code. You don't have to be in that religion, Judeo-Christian religion, but they have to believe that it captures some kind of moral code, right? The people who don't. And of course, we can't go back to 2004 and say, the role of religion has dropped. All kinds of things have changed in the last 20 years. But anyway, here's a story about results, a failed replication that actually gets us to understand something different. And now, in retrospect, I wouldn't call it a failed replication. I would say that this was a different experiment that revealed something else. So I think there is a class like that, where people who do the replication do something else important that is different, an experiment before, different conditions, all kinds of things like that. And it actually is not negating the results. It's about something else. So that's one type. I'm not saying it's everything, but I think one type is like that. In a very different way, early in my career, I spent a lot of time in the lab, and I had people read instructions on a computer, right? There was all kind of computerized experiments. And my observation was that people read instructions very quickly. They press buttons, they don't read, and then they get to the experiment, they don't remember the experiment. And I had my own procedure. And my procedure was to read it with them. I had a secret key that they couldn't press continue. The continue button was grayed out, and they had to press a secret letter. And I read to them the instructions. And I had it on a big screen, and I would read it slowly. And at the end of each screen, I would say, "Do you understand?" And if they said yes, I would say, "Please press on the letter L." And then we would get to the next screen, and so on. And I made really sure that everybody understood the instructions. And I had another thing that I did. I told people, I said, "Look, I know you came here for the experiment. You were promised X dollars. But if you don't take the experiment seriously, please leave now. I'm happy to pay you, but having people who are not taking it seriously is just bad for me." So I basically said, pay attention and so on. Now, most experiments are happening online with people who don't see the experimenter. Nobody's slowing them to read the instructions. We have some ways to test how seriously people taking the experiment. But I think those are very different ways to run experiments. I think that when people ran studies with me in the good old days, I think they paid attention. I think the instructions were clear to them. I think they wanted to work hard. I think they paid more attention. It was like they were fully engaged. I think if we compare now to a lot of the ways experiments are run, they're run on MTurk, on the internet, where people are at home, watching TV while paying little attention to the experiment. And it's not clear to me that those things should replicate. Now, if you think about this from everything we've talked about today, these are not the same experiments. An experiment in which somebody is engaged and attentive and caring and paying attention is not the same as an experiment when somebody is careless and doing something else at the same time. I'm not saying that one of them is right and one of them is wrong, but they're capturing very different environments. So there's another class like this, that things have changed. We don't know exactly to put our fingers on what have changed, but things have changed. And I'll give you one other example. We ran experiments on dishonesty. And in some labs, cheating is allowed, and there are some labs that cheating is not allowed.
Allowed by who?
By the experimenter, by the people who run the lab. So economists...
Why would they allow cheating?
So psychologists think that deception is sometimes unavoidable. Yeah, you're coming to an experiment on helping other people. You know this experiment called the Good Samaritan?
Either that phrase just is so familiar that I think I do, or
so people come to an experiment, and then you say, "Oh, you're late for another experiment in the other side of the corridor, and please run." And they run to the other side, and then they meet somebody in the middle they don't know that drops pencils. And the question is, do they stop to help him? And it turns out that sometimes they say you run, sometimes you don't run. And even when it's seminary students who just finished a lecture on the Good Samaritan, they don't stop if they're in a hurry. That's an experiment that you deceive people. People think they are there for something else, but the goal is something else. And
That's what you mean by cheating.
yeah.
I thought you meant cheating on the data.
No. I mean labs that allow deception. Labs that allow deception. And sometimes it's justified or not. For example, now I have an experiment that I have been wanting to run for a while that involves deception. It's an experiment that compares how much people are willing to pay for rent versus buying a house. And the initial results show that people spend too much on rent and not enough on buying. So imagine you see a house and say, how much would you pay rental? How much would you pay on buying? Now, buying is rental plus an investment, plus some tax and all kinds of other things. And the results in the beginning on these studies on the internet show that people are not paying enough on buying. But these are not people in the market. They might not understand all the considerations. So I wanted to have an open house on a house that is not really for sale. And people would come and they would say, hey, we didn't decide if to buy it or to sell it or to rent it. Please give us an offer to both. But those will be real people in the market. And the ethics committee said this is unacceptable. This is too much deception. Then they don't want me to run this. They're not allowing me to run this experiment. And they get to. That's why we have an ethics committee to help us figure out what's an acceptable deception for social value and what's not. But anyway, there's some labs that allow deception and some labs that don't. And it turns out that you run experiments in 2 labs like this and things look different. Right?
2 labs that allow deception.
A lab that allows deception and a lab that doesn't. You run experiments in both of those, the results can be different.
Now, do you think that is, so all these different things you're walking through, these are what lead to the social sciences having a replication crisis?
I think a lot of it is that. Like people look at something not replicating and said, somebody cheated. I think that's the minority of the cases. There are some what's called p-hacking. There are some things that somebody ran 10 experiments, 2 worked out. They published the 2 that worked out and not the 8 that didn't. That's a well-known problem in science in general, right? That we don't publish null results. But I think a lot of it is that we haven't really captured the environment correctly. Like things like, is the lab allows deception or not? Is the experiment in person or online? There's lots of variables that I think matters a lot. And people are quantifying, when I motivated my participants, I think they were much more sensitive to nuances in description. When people don't read the instructions very carefully, of course, the results are going to be weaker. So I think there's lots of things like that we think that they are failure to replicate, but in fact they're not. They're just that there's an important variable that which people have changed, but we haven't accounted for that variable.
Okay, so one of the criticisms that you take online centers around one particular study with data of mileage on a car.
That's right.
Whether you sign up at the top or at the bottom. It's taken on a life of its own. And I don't know whether to interpret that through the lens of the people calling you Goebbels. So it's like all the sort of craziness over here made me start discounting this over here. But I think it warrants a rebuttal. Given the whole like 2 different fonts being used and that supposedly one font correlates to ones that look like it's using a randomized function instead of like reality.
Let's say a couple of things. So first of all, there was a data set from 2007, 2008 that was published in 2012 that 2 years ago we discovered was falsified. Like the facts are the facts. There's a data set that was falsified and it was in a paper that I was the 4th co-author on, but certainly in my paper, pointed out to us, immediately retracted, also started replicating the results. We'll see what the results show. Terrible thing, right? Shouldn't happen. Shouldn't happen. I worked on many papers with many people. Terrible. I wish it never happened. It did happen. Just to be clear, I never falsified data. I wouldn't think about it. Not part of my arsenal. I can go more deeply into it if you care. I also, you see my hands. I don't even. It's been years since I touched data. I try to do that, but anyway, paper. I was connected to a terrible outcome. Happily retracted it, replicating it. So we'll, just because the data was falsified and we retracted the paper doesn't mean much about is the result effective or not. That data set is terrible data set, but
you're replicating it now?
Yeah. And
when will that come out?
I hope soon. The paper is under a second round of review, so hopefully soon, and the results replicate it. And of course, we move forward, and we can. There are different types of ways of signing, and some of them work better and worse, and digital versus just checking the box, and we kind of get much more nuances into this. Now the internet storm. I don't know storm, but it's mostly Twitter. Some people have decided that I falsified the data, and very hard to. Aside from saying, look at all my other papers, look at everything I do. I don't use my hands, and so on. Very, very hard to argue that you didn't do something when the. How do you prove it happened?
That your sister's not a prostitute when you don't have a sister?
That's right. So these are largely academics, different than the COVID deniers. They also don't use death threats, but I think that the experience with the COVID deniers inoculated me to some degree. Right? The idea that here's a very difficult thing, that the idea that some people would hate me no matter what, and that they're not going to be convinced is very, very tough idea to accept. And I'm not sure I accepted it 100%, but I accepted it to a large degree, to say there are some people that just have made a decision. And even whether they're academics or not, and so on, there's no difference. Some people have just made a decision.
So, how do you think about that as you're replicating the experiment, knowing people are going to go through that thing with a fine-tooth comb?
So first of all, people have gone through everything I've done with a fine-tooth comb for a long time. It's not new. Things have changed a lot, right? So that data set was from 2007, 2008. Science has improved a lot. Everything we do now is pre-registered. The data is online. That study was collected with paper and pencil, and somebody was supposed to enter it into a computer. Now everything is computerized. So lots of things have improved. I think the pre-registration, we talked earlier about how it's good to state in advance what you predict will find, and not just and exactly how you go to the data analysis. So now the acceptable standard in research is you write in advance what you expect and also exactly how you're going to analyze it. And then you just continue. And if you later on come with a new method of analyzing the data, you said this was not pre-registered. So it's clear that that's now a more exploratory and less. So no, I welcome scrutiny. And also, we both, I think, like this idea that we don't know, and my pride is completely not connected with falsified data. Terrible. My pride is very much connected to that. But whether I'm wrong or right, like let's say this. One day somebody will find out that I ran an experiment and turns out the result is not correct. Because X, Y, and Z, or because I did it on a hot day and on a different day it's this, or I did it in a religious place, and when you do it in most of the world, it does, whatever it is, my ego is not connected at all to any findings. My ego is connected to my feeling of integrity, and that I do my best in everything. But there's no finding that you say, oh, Dan, if they found out that finding X or Y doesn't hold or was limited to this circumstance or something like that, I would say that's great. We're learning, we're improving, and so on. And the other thing that is helping me is I feel that accusations it's very easy to make accusations. It's extra easy to make accusation about something that happens a long time ago, because they're harder to disprove. But I think time is actually good, right? So somebody makes an accusation, and I now take the time to replicate the study. That takes years, but it's fine, right? We have many years. I still have many years ahead, and there are things to fix, and it will take some time to fix. But I feel that in the long term, what's correct will show up, even though in the short term it's not the case.
It's really interesting. There's something about the way that we're living our lives in public. It's not lost on me how much of myself is out on the internet, and that as I change, it's inevitable that I'll contradict myself from years ago, and we're the first generation that are living through this. And then also just people form opinions, you know? So the idea of misbelief, that it is all too easy for any of us to have motivated reasoning, to see what we want to see, to not be able to accurately identify the truth. And then to have that on full display for millions of people is, it's interesting. It's a very weird thing that we're going through, and I don't know what the consequences will be.
Very weird. And there's something about like a lawyer's approach to things. So, but in 2008 you said X. Yeah, at the time, I thought X, and I learned more since 2008, and maybe I know something different now. What are we interested in? Are we interested in finding examples where I changed my mind or learned more, or are we interested in understanding the truth? But you used that word. No, not what I meant, and so on. But it's I think a lot of what is lost is the presumption of good intentions. So yesterday was the Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur, the Jewish fasting day, and the thing that I contemplated is whether I'm willing to. I have a very optimistic view of the world. I feel,
even after everything that's happened.
Yes.
You say in the book that it legitimately impacted your outlook.
That's right. It did, but I still have an optimistic view, but not as much. But I used to think that when things are going wrong, they're either mistakes or some wrong beliefs. But I didn't think that there was lots of evil intentions, and that's kind of a big issue, right? If I think that people mean well, but sometimes they believe something wrong, but meaning well is incredibly was kind of my assumption going forward.
Do you think the people that were legitimately calling for your execution meant well?
No.
Okay, so
I'm
not
saying,
everybody.
No, I'm saying pre-COVID, my belief in the world was
that people mean well.
that people mean well for the most part. I got to believe that less, and there are less people who mean well, and there are more people who, produce fake damaging news for their own benefit and social signaling and all kinds of things, right? In the COVID world, hating me became a currency of social acceptance, right? You want a bit more likes and a bit more views. Post something new about my evil intentions, and that would get you social currency. And yesterday I was debating whether what's my view on the goodness of humanity, and whether I'm willing to reset my expectations. Because when you expect good intentions, there's also opportunity to get disappointed. So I thought, am I ready to change my basic assumption that maybe there's a large group that doesn't have good intentions, and they're different. And I thought about this the whole day, like, what are my standards? What am I willing to accept and not accept? And what's my working assumption? And I concluded that I'm not yet ready to move to that hypothesis. So I am more. Is
that because you don't think it's true, or because of something else?
Don't ask me that. No, I'm joking. It's. I think it's not because I don't. I think there is much more evil than I thought, and I think it's increasing and so on. But I'm not fully willing to embrace it yet as a working hypothesis. So it's kind of the delusional stage. I'm recognizing it, but I'm not yet ready to move to that as being the glasses from which I view the world. I think that could have it frightens me to accept a more negative of the world in terms of how it would influence my motivation and so on. So I'm not yet accepting it.
It's really interesting. I tell people you should do and believe that which moves you towards your goals.
Yeah.
Because I don't ever want to intentionally believe something that's false, but identifying what is true is so difficult.
Yeah.
If it is difficult, then I would rather, if I'm going to be wrong and I'm just sort of taking my best guess, then I'd rather lean towards something that moves me towards where I want to be. And if believing that the world, since neither of us really know, like, what are the percentages, or in given situations, could a bad person do good? It's so complex. Maybe you really are better off. It's interesting. You and I maybe are passing on parallel paths. So I used to have a just fundamental, wildly optimistic, everything is going to work out okay. And then COVID really made me scared for other people. I've been successful enough. I wasn't worried about myself, but I was very worried about other people. And the more I pulled back the curtain on how the world worked, hoping that I could help people that were really going to struggle through that time, the more I realized, whoa, the world doesn't work the way that I thought it did. And that there are cabals, and there are some conspiracy theories that turn out to be true, and that there are people that they want for your downfall, and they will go way out of their way. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't be lovely people. Like, they might have a niece that just adores them and that they really are legitimately kind and wonderful to that person, and just the complexity of human nature. But I have given myself over to, this is a more complicated and high risk game than I ever thought, but it's still so beautiful. And so I really want to help people, but I feel like the doe-eyed version of me is gone. That I now have a healthy amount of cynicism. It's not, I think if you give in to the darkness, it's a misconception. First of all, you're probably spilling too far, you're going too hard. But I had cultivated a naivete that I've let go of. But with the same desire to help people, especially young people, get the right mindset so that they can really be high functioning in society. but I embrace the ideology of a warrior, of somebody who is going to have to enter battle, and that there is going to be bloodshed and all of that.
So talk to me in a year. I think I can sense the need for that shift. I'm not ready for it yet. It's a tough transition.
Yeah.
It's a tough transition.
It's interesting, man, because you're at I'm going to guess you're 50-ish.
56.
Oh shit. Wow. Well, congratulations. Doing very well. It's an interesting phase to hit that. Do you know, oh God, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Oh, he's so amazing. Fuck. He just wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey and I love him to death. And he has sat in that chair. Arthur Brooks. Do you know Arthur Brooks?
No, I don't.
Oh my God. He's got this really fascinating idea that people go through these two major phases in their life. And phase one is like you're sharp, you're like that young energy of just like crazy ideas, big risks, all of that. And then you get to a point in your career where you don't quite have that like nascent hyper energy, new ideas, like the world produced you, your 20s and 30s is really sort of the peak of that sort of creative genius where you and the world meet at a moment where you're able to have an insight that other people of an older generation just are not going to be able to have. But that we all transition into a wisdom phase. He has a way better way of explaining this. But you go into where you're now able to synthesize ideas in a way that you couldn't before. And you're able to tie things together that you can't when you're young. And so he says you really do shift into a totally different phase of your life. And most people can't navigate that moment well. And he tells this just grueling story about he's on an airplane and he hears this couple in front of him talking, and old couple, like 80s. And the man is like, he can't hear everything he's saying, but the man says like, nobody cares about me anymore. And the woman's like, don't be ridiculous. Of course, people still care about you. And then towards the end of the flight, he says, I just wish I were dead. And she's like, that's ridiculous. Like, how could you think that about yourself? And so Arthur's like, I got to see, like, this guy, obviously middle manager, like he just never quite like made it to his full potential. And the heartbreak of realizing, oh, I'm too old now. And it's all played out. And he stands up and he looks at the guy, and it's one of the most famous people on planet Earth. And he said that guy had accomplished so much. As he walked off the plane, people came out from like the cockpit and everything. Sir, I just had to thank you. You inspired me so much as a kid. And so he was like, he has this completely disorienting moment where he realizes, wait a second, if that guy who I admire, half the people on this plane admire, literally just said 20 minutes ago, I'd be better off dead. What am I doing? Like, all the accomplishment in the world is never going to get me where I want to go. And so how do I make sure that I don't fall prey to that trap? So anyway, ends up going and quitting his job, completely switching, moving into this new phase of his life where he's basically trying to take advantage of, okay, I can bring wisdom together. I can really pursue like what is real happiness. And so it'll be interesting, man. You've been through such a crazy crucible through this whole thing right at the age where you're naturally in this sort of big transition moment. You're
absolutely right. And I told you in the beginning, I'm thinking now about what's my next adventure. Where does it take me? I do feel this, with this, the rest of my books, there's always another irrationality and things to fix. This book is different. It's kind of a big picture on a big topic. And when it came out last week, I left all the groups. There was I understand the problem now. I can stop that part of understanding. Now we need to find solutions and so on. Right. But it was much more transition period than this. But yeah, maybe it's something also with the age. I do feel there's the next chapter is waiting, and I just need to figure it out. I'm delaying decisions to January, but January is going to be a month to figure out the next chapter.
We're going to go on another month-long hike?
So this year, I've been going every year
For a month?
in the last 6 years. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
By yourself?
No, with two friends.
Okay. Always the same two guys?
Yeah, always.
Old school friends?
Yeah. So I started the first year I did with one friend. He's my best friend from 7th grade.
Whoa.
And then another friend joined us for a few days. And that's the friend that kept on traveling with us. Yes, but it's been the three of us for a while.
And is it like really rough, or are you guys like bougie hikers?
Depends on the year. Last year we did the Camino Santiago. Do you know this hike? It's a pilgrim hike in Spain, 800 kilometers. We stayed in inns. We did the high desert.
It took a month.
A month, yeah.
Wow.
We hiked in the desert, with the Bedouins. You know, it takes about a week to get. So it takes about a week to get to the pace of this life in which you wake up in the morning and you just walk the whole day.
Do you have your cell phone?
We do have cell phones. The rules are no phones from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
Legit.
The first year was really interesting. So the first year we did the Israel Trail, and both me and Ron grew up in Israel. And I had an online application, and we walked for 30 days. We invited people to join us for some of those days, and we accepted applications from anybody. And lots of people applied, and everybody had to say what they want to contribute. And so we had a few days just us. A few days we invited like friends from first grade. Like we did different periods of our lives. And there were quite a few days when we met random people. And the rules for the road were, we start the morning, everybody tells an embarrassing story about themselves. What's said on the trail stays on the trail. And that was a great icebreaker. And after people said something personal and embarrassing, it was great. Like we walked. We finished, by the way, with the party in the desert. We invited some of the people that walked with us, and that was great. And since then, we tried different things. This year, I think we'll do Croatia. That's the plan. But it's about walking, and when you spend time with friends face to face, the conversation is very different. When you spend time walking next to each other, and you have the whole day and you have a month, the conversation is very different. Like usually we don't repeat the same topic. Like, oh, we just finished talking about this. Why again? When you walk, it's fine. Like things that bother us are okay to bring up again and again and rethink and rehash and try to understand things better. It's also much easier to take a few moments and walk by yourself and think and then come back. There's a dynamic of the communication and the thought process that is fantastic.
It's interesting getting moving, the way that it changes the way that you think. Amazing. Getting out of civilization and having those.
Much of this book I wrote in the Alps. I rented a little cottage, and every day I walked up the mountain for 2 hours. There was a little coffee shop on the ski lift, and I would get there and I would dictate or write or do whatever, and then walk back and keep on working on the book. And for the 2 hours of that, it was fixed 2 hours. I can't do it faster. I mean, tiny bit faster, but not really. And I would have a topic. Today, I want to think about this part of this chapter. And sometimes I would have a solution of how I want it after half an hour. But I still had an hour and a half. So I kept on thinking about it. And it always got better. And I think there's some really nice research on how we become more creative when we move. But in addition to that, the forcing myself to have 2 hours to think about an idea was very, very good. Usually I think we have kind of premature closure. No, I think I understand this. No. Keep on thinking about it. It will get better. A little bit like the illusion of explanatory depth. So I think, and then I would get up, and it was wonderful. I think I'll adopt it for the next projects.
It's really interesting. Let me ask you, was there something therapeutic about old friends from like grade school?
Yeah, no question. No question. There's the...
Is it helping you access a different part of your personality? What is it?
I think that a part of it is trust. If you say...
Because you've stayed in touch with them since then.
Since then, they know me in every aspect of that. So this month is good for lots of things, but it's really good to ask real question about where we want to head in life, and the people that you want on the other side are people that know you and you trust. So I can, Ron knows me from seventh grade. Some elements he knows better than I do, and I can talk about everything with both trust and knowledge, and it's really quite amazing. It's really quite amazing. We talk about resilience and social networks and so on. Real social connections. Yeah, and of course, it's also improved our friendship. And so we were good friends, but spending a month together a year has an impact.
Oh, that's legit for sure.
Yeah, up to that point, I felt it was selfish to take time off. Like for many years, I'm a very good workaholic. I basically work. I'm really good at working.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, and I always felt guilty. I even felt guilty exercising. So
Whoa.
I have so much email, so many people asking for things. Like, what's the selfishness of spending an hour, meditating? I can't meditate for it, but what's an hour running where I could answer 17 more emails? Like, I really felt that the amount of things on my plate was so high that how could I be selfish and find time to exercise? And then I took this month, and I don't. The rest of my year looks very different, but it's been really amazing. It's been really amazing. And once I did it, I said, why did I wait until age 50 to start? Why didn't I start earlier?
That's really interesting. It's really interesting. So, have you, by any chance, ever done psychedelics?
You mean in a legal?
In a legal way, of course. I will assume that you were wise enough to.
Only legal, and yes.
What is it about? So I have not, but I'm very eager to try it. What is its utility?
So, I think that the utility is not about the trip; it's about the transformation. And since we talked about this question about life and work, I'll tell you about one of my first hallucinations. Is a hallucination in which I'm in front of God, and big.
Are you
face.
a believer?
No.
Interesting.
But I'm huge head, curly. If you're wondering, curly hair, beard, and it's clear that I'm going to be destined for heaven or hell. That's the question, and it's my judgment. And to my happiness, I see the people waiting to come on the witness stand, and I see my mother and my sisters and my wife and my daughter. All the women in my life are waiting to be on the witness stand, and I sigh. I'm very happy because they're all on my side. How can this go wrong? And then they get on the witness stand, and they all say how I never had time for them.
Whoa.
Everyone says I don't have time. I always prefer work. That I can get a call from somebody in Africa and I go, but if somebody needs me at home, Anyway, it looks bleaker and bleaker as things progress. And then it's my turn to plead for my things. And I don't know how I was so creative, but I was creative. And I basically says, I evoke Nelson Mandela. And I say to God, think of Nelson Mandela. He was not home for like 30 years. Now, I'm not Nelson Mandela by far, but I also wasn't not home for 30 years. So I basically make the argument that not everybody is destined to be a standard spouse and father and so on. We all have a different set of skills and calling, and we each need to navigate our own path, and we shouldn't be held to the average standard. That's just not right. And with Nelson Mandela, I said to God, look, God, you wouldn't have wanted him to do anything else. What a remarkable human being, like one of the few people who changed the trajectory of the world with his, well, again, completely arrogant to invoke him, but still that was the case. And and the amazing thing about this is that after this was over, I felt less guilty about I resolved that problem. So again, it's not about the specific, it's about the transition. Now, if you think about this as a metaphor, I think that for me at least, what happened is that there's all kinds of things I debate within myself, and these things help me make decisions. Or I'll give you another example. We've all said, I never want to work with assholes again. We've all said it. And one experience I had included that exactly. One of my startups, something happened between two people. I felt that there was somebody who really misbehaved toward another person. I felt terrible about this. And I had an experience about this thing. And when it ended, I came to this conclusion, like everybody has come to this conclusion, it's not new. But under that condition, I had the force to actually follow through, to stop project, to ask people to leave, to do all kinds of things like that. So I think it is about the transformation that you want. So I wouldn't do it for fun, but I think it's about figuring out what is not working, how we want to solve it, and getting the conviction to actually follow through. That's
somebody that knows as much about the brain and psychology as you. What's going on? Is it taking off those normal distorted glasses and giving you just a radically different perspective, and now all of a sudden you have clarity?
So we have this thing called the default network.
Mm-hmm.
And the default network basically is a network that quiets the brain. And these substances, LSD, mushrooms, I mean, different ones that work differently, but LSD and mushrooms basically quiet the default network. And what it means is that different parts of your brain start talking to each other more directly, right? And remember, the way that neurons work, once two neurons start talking to each other, it strengthens the relationship between them, not just at the moment, right? The word that, if you think about how most of the activity is not in the neural, it's the connection between them. But once you strengthen a connection, that connection becomes stronger, right? It will continue to be like this. It might decay later, but for a while, it would get stronger. So what happened is that the default network quiets down, and the areas of the brain start communicating with each other. And for me, that means that we get associations that we usually don't get. That this part of your memory can talk to another part of your memory, and our auditory cortex can be connected to something else. So our ability to think and to think creatively is enhanced. Emotions can be more connected. So that's really what's happening. And again, the experience can be good or can experience be bad. And when the experience is, most of my experiences, like, this thing about being in front of God, even though he agreed with me at the end, I wouldn't have called it a good experience. but it was transformative. And I think most of other people have different experiences, but I think for me that's the main reason. The main reason is to say I have a problem that is complex and difficult, and I'm not sure what to do, and I've been debating it for a while, and this is a very useful way to make this a transformative decision.
No, I love that. Where can people follow you?
The best place is my website, danariely.com. And that's it.
All right. Well, people, I highly encourage you to read his books. Few things have had a bigger impact on the way that I view my own mind. And speaking of things that will change how you view your own mind, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace.
If you enjoyed this episode, check out this deep conversation with Donald Hoffman about reality and consciousness.
What we are avatars of the One. The One awareness is exploring all of its possibilities through different avatars. So somehow there is this field of awareness